Chapter 82. It was late at night, and everyone fell asleep around the bonfire. Although the news of the vampire invasion was shocking and frightening, it was not the immediate danger, so they still needed to sleep. Hanjin sat there, throwing a handful of dry twigs into the bonfire from time to time. He was the only one who couldn't fall asleep. His dream was to create a city of his own and have the highest right of speech or the last right of explanation. But the situation was getting more and more chaotic. What should he do to seize the opportunity? Hanjin was a self-cultivator and a private investigator. He was far from being a hero, nor was he a military enthusiast. Strictly speaking, because of his profession, he had seen people from all walks of life and was good at figuring out people's thoughts. Now that he had a dream, he was at a loss as to how to realize it. He didn't know where to start. At this moment, a low moan was heard. Hanjin raised his head and looked in the direction of the sound. Leger's body moved a little and then slowly wriggled. Hanjin stood up and walked in front of Leger. He whispered, "You're awake? It seems that your body is much better than I thought." Leger raised his head with difficulty and saw Hanjin. The scene he saw before he fainted for the last time quickly replayed in his mind. His impression of Hanjin overlapped with the current Hanjin. Leger was about to say something when he suddenly smelled an unpleasant smell. He realized that his arms were covered in blood and there were many dark red clots on his hands. It was as if he had been in a pool of blood. You saved me?" Leger showed a shocked expression. "Don't worry so much. The most important thing for you now is to rest." Hanjin changed the topic. His knowledge of the thick black theory was limited. He could only say that he picked up Leger, not saved him. He couldn't consider himself as a benefactor. "You killed them." Leger couldn't give up on this question. "I didn't kill them," Hanjin answered truthfully. "You saved me. Do you still need to worry about me betraying you?" Leger smiled bitterly. He did not believe Hanjin's answer at all. At that time, if he did not kill all the night, he would have been captured long ago. Moreover, how could he explain the bloodstains on his body? Hanjin laughed dryly. He didn't know what to say. "Thank you," Leger said softly. Although his words were simple, his tone was firm. "Don't mention it." Hanjin smiled. He was still worthy of the word thank you. If he did not bring Leger out, then Leger's fate was sealed. If he did not freeze to death, starve to death, or suffocate to death from the flowing blood, or be killed by the vampires. When he first picked up Leger's face was covered in blood. Even his nose was covered in blood. He was the one who personally wiped Leger clean. Leger's eyes flashed with an indescribable emotion. The fact that Leger accepted his gratitude proved many things, including the reason why he was lying here and what happened. After a while, Leger said softly, "You got yourself into big trouble. Really, you shouldn't have helped me." "Trouble?" Hanjin laughed. "I don't care about trouble. Ever since he came to this world, he had been in a lot of trouble. Unlike the current Leger, Hanjin had always kept himself clean. Therefore, his calm and carefree expression was clearly reflected in Leger's eyes. At this moment, to Leger, Hanjin was a very charismatic person. That kind of temperament was hard to describe with words. It was really convincing. At least, it convinced him. Leger didn't know what to say. Thank him? Instead of using words to thank him, he would rather remember this kindness in his heart. "All right, you should rest early. Recovering from your injuries is the most important thing." Hanjin smiled. "If you want to leave after your injuries are healed, we won't stop you. If you want to stay with us, as long as we have something to eat, we won't stop you." After saying this, Hanjin drew a charm of spirit refreshment in the air and threw it into Leger's body. Leger was shocked at first, then felt very ashamed. He subconsciously thought that his benefactor was attacking him with magic. After a while, he could clearly feel the changes caused by the charm of spirit refreshment. His face changed, and he said in a trembling voice, What magic is this?" "A magic that helps people." Hanjin smiled. His smile had an unfathomable meaning. Sasu slowly opened his eyes. From an angle that Leger couldn't see, he gave Hanjin a thumbs up. Only those who had experienced it could understand that feeling. Which professional in the world didn't want to reach the peak? However, those who had enough confidence in themselves and could see hope were few and far between. This was because their talent was limited, their energy was limited, and their time was even more limited. Han Jin's magic overturned all of this. As long as they could get Han Jin's help, the future would definitely not be a dream. Sasu recalled how he felt when he first tasted this kind of magic. He knew very well how tempting it was to any professional. "You're awake?" Han Jin smiled. "Shoo." Sasu put his index finger in front of his lips and pointed to the side. Following Sasu's finger, Han Jin almost laughed out loud. Before they fell asleep, Morrisons and Sylvia whispered to each other for a while. After they fell asleep, the two of them were naturally pressed together. However, Sylvia was not sleeping well. One of her legs was pressed against Morrison's chest, and her breasts were pressed against Morrison's face. The two of them were entangled together. Morrison's, on the other hand, was sleeping soundly with a sweet smile on his face. In fact, Morrison's was very alert when he slept. He didn't even know that he was being pressed against by someone. It could only be said that Sylvia's breath made him feel very comfortable and at ease. "Raphael, do you know what's going on between the two of them?" Sasu asked in a low voice. "Didn't Morrison's tell you?" "No, I asked him. He told me to mind my own business," Sasu replied gloomily. "Sylvia is his teacher's daughter. The two of them grew up together," Han Jin said with a smile. "As for what's going on between the two of them, I don't think I need to tell you, right? You should be able to see it yourself." "Yes, I know that Sylvia likes Morrison's a lot. But does Morrison's like Sylvia too?" "Of course," Han Jin said softly. "After all, the two of them have been together for more than 10 years. However, Morrison's can't stand Sylvia's temper. He's very troubled, so he deliberately talked to me about it." "This guy," Sasu said angrily. "I asked him, and he told me to get lost. But he took the initiative to talk to you. He's looking down on me. Morrison said that you have a cunning face. He doesn't trust you. Telling you this is equivalent to giving you something to use against him." Han Jin chuckled. Sasu was not convinced. However, when he looked at Han Jin's handsome face and warm smile, he knew that he could not compare to Han Jin in this aspect. Sasu sat down beside Han Jin and said with a smile, "Tell me, what did Morrison's talk to you about?" "That's not good." Han Jin was a little hesitant. What's not good about that?" "I'm not going to tell him," Sasu said anxiously. "Actually, it's very normal." "Sasu, have you ever imagined your future wife?" "I have." Sasu rolled his eyes. He was going to ask about Morrison's secret. Why was he being dragged into this? "Your imagination must be perfect. She must be gentle and generous, smart and beautiful. Anyway, the person in your imagination is always full of strengths. As for weaknesses, there's not a single one." Sasu was stunned. Of course. Who would imagine weaknesses for no reason? That's the contradiction between reality and dreams. Han Jin said softly. Morrison's is the same. He thinks that his wife should be perfect. That's why he doesn't think that Sylvia will become his wife. However, he likes Sylvia. Then what did you tell Morrison's? I told him that everyone has their own weaknesses. Not just other people, Morrison's has them too. Han Jin paused. What do you think is the most troublesome weakness of Morrison's? He's not hygienic, Sasu said through gritted teeth. He was deeply troubled by this. After training with the sword, he's not only sweaty, but he also likes to run around. He wouldn't listen to me. He said that it's the smell of a man. Tui, that's what I said at that time. I asked him if Silner had ever despised him. Han Jin said softly, actually, liking someone doesn't only mean liking her strengths. You also have to accept her weaknesses. Sylvia is a good person. Because of her naivety, she's not a Philistine. When Morrison's was still a teenager, Sylvia liked him. I think, no matter how high Morrison's climbs in the future or falls, Sylvia will definitely be by his side. This kind of relationship must be cherished. You're right, Sasu said softly. Of course, Sylvia's weaknesses are as obvious as her strengths. Because of her naivety, she seems very childish. She doesn't know how dangerous people can be. She doesn't know how difficult the world is. She will always bring trouble to herself and others. You just said Sylvia is naivety, so she's not a Philistine. Now you're saying that because of her naivety, She seems childish. Sasu smiled bitterly. I'm confused. Is naivety a good thing or a bad thing? Did you see Morrison's sword? I saw it. Sasu was even more confused. Why? Actually, many things are double-edged blades. If used well, they can help people. If not, they can harm people. Sasu paused. I'm curious. When Morrison's heard you say this, he didn't become confused. Monthly summoning ticket. This is the first day on the shelves. Brothers, give me some motivation. Apart from the scheduled updates at 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. every day, I'll also update regularly. I'll definitely do what I say. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 83. Even if he's confused, do you think he'll say it out loud? Don't you know him well after spending so much time with him? Han Jin chuckled. That guy will never allow anyone to insult his intelligence. Even if he doesn't understand, he'll pretend to understand. That's right. Sasu also laughed. Then his gaze fell on Leger. All right, you're Leger, right? There was one thing that everyone had repeatedly talked about. The lack of a qualified thief in the team had caused inconveniences in many aspects. Leger's appearance fulfilled their wishes. Sasu was well aware of the reason why Han Jin used magic to seduce Leger. Yes, hello. Leger smiled. My name is Sasu. From now on, we're friends. Please take care of me. Leger was slightly stunned. Then he smiled. If you don't mind that I'm a burden, I'll do my best. Sasu turned to Han Jin. He even glanced at Leger from the corner of his eyes. What he meant was, do you think this person is suitable? Sunir had previously been worried about not being able to rope in people casually. So far, this small team was still very united. Although everyone kept some secrets, they could still trust each other. If they attracted a stinky fish, then the result would be a fishy pot of soup. Han Jin thought for a moment and slowly nodded. Leger's old servant was able to face death with such a resolute attitude. This proved that Leger and his father were both extraordinary. Loyalty was very flexible. There weren't many people who were foolishly loyal. Take himself and Stillberg as an example. If he beat and scolded Stillberg every day, he would do the things he enjoyed and let Stillberg suffer. It was fine for a short period of time, but in the long run, would Stillberg be able to endure such an inhumane life? Any relationship in this world is two-way. Sasu trusted Han Jin's judgment and changed the topic. Raphael, what do you think we should do in the future? The Bite Man is going to be in a mess soon. Sai, what kind of world is this? I can't even find a quiet place to stay. We don't have the ability to change anything. We can only take one step at a time and go with the flow, Han Jin said slowly. Bite Man? What's wrong with the Bite Man? Leger was shocked. Zagun's vampire guard and dark elves have broken into the Bite Man. How could this be? Leger wanted to get up and ask, but he pulled at his wound and groaned in pain. Calm down. We're not the only ones who can't do anything about this. You're the same. Han Jin bitterly smiled. Let's ask Sunir tomorrow morning. I can't do anything about it either. Sunir's voice sounded. The Vampire Guard is similar to the Silver Pegasus Army. They're both known for their speed and flexibility. The Beatman's army has no way of dealing with the Vampire Guard who's avoiding a decisive battle. What if you were the commander of the Bite Man? What would you do? Han Jin asked. Sunir paused. Did you notice? The Vampire Guard uses tactics of breaking up the whole into small groups. That's why we met those 10 or so vampires. If I were in command, I'd spend a lot of money to hire a large group of mercenaries. They'd split up and fight to the death. The regular army would be in charge of supporting them from the side. When a Vampire Guard feels that they've sacrificed too much, they'd withdraw themselves. But with the Vampire Guard style, the Beatman's losses won't be small. At least a few hundred small villages will be turned into ruins, or even more. Is there no other way besides this? You can ask the dragons for help. Sunir's expression was very complicated. There was mockery and hatred in her eyes. She was probably thinking about the battle that caused the Silver Pegasus army to collapse. But The dragons are very interested in watching the races of the continent kill each other. I'm guessing that they won't care about the Beatman's life or death, even though they also hate those creatures of darkness. Forget it. Let's not talk about this anymore. Han Jin said softly. Let's all go to bed early. We still have a long journey tomorrow. They couldn't talk about this topic anymore. Leger's emotions seemed to be getting more and more agitated. He was obviously very concerned about the Beatman's safety. If they continue to talk about this, the idea of recruiting Leger might fail. Asterisk, 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 the night passed silently. The next morning, Morrison's yawned and slowly opened his eyes. When he saw the scene around him, he couldn't help but jump in fright. Everyone had already woken up. Everyone's eyes were focused on him. Their gazes were very strange. Morrison's only just realized that half of Sylvia's body was on top of him. His hands were wrapped around Sylvia's waist. Morrison's was so embarrassed that he immediately pushed Sylvia away. However, Morrison's strength was a little too strong. Sylvia's body flew more than a meter into the air. With a thud, she fell to the ground in an extremely unsightly position. Even the most sound asleep person would be startled awake by this kind of attack. Sylvia suddenly opened her eyes. However, she still didn't move. She probably still didn't understand the situation. The next moment, Sylvia felt a sweet taste in her mouth. Waves of pain came from her lips. She had bitten her own lip during the collision. Sylvia jumped up and roared, Who the F asterisk CK dares to throw me? About half of the people reached out their hands and pointed at Morrison's. Sylvia took a step forward and grabbed Morrison's ear. She roared, Do you want to die? Morrison's pulled a long face. He was a reasonable person. If Sylvia had grabbed his ear for no reason, he definitely wouldn't have tolerated Sylvia's temper. However, he was in the wrong. He wanted to explain, but he didn't know how to. He wanted to admit defeat and say a few nice words. However, how could a man admit defeat to a woman in front of so many people? Ahem. Han Jin coughed dryly. I think we should buy some tents. Otherwise, it'll be too inconvenient at night. Yeah. Sasu nodded in agreement. Sylvia, don't blame Morrison's. I think he just had a nightmare. He was kicking and hitting like a madman. You just happened to be lying on top of him, so he threw you out, Sunir said gently. However, her voice was filled with laughter. Yeah, sis, I didn't do it on purpose. Morrison smiled apologetically. You're useless. How old are you? You're still afraid of nightmares. Sylvia's face was filled with resentment. Han Jin and Sasu were speechless. Actually, Sunir's main point wasn't the nightmare, but that she was lying on top of Morrison's. However, Sylvia didn't realize it at all. Perhaps she thought it was normal? Gossips. It was said that Sylvia's father had passed away a long time ago. After that, the two of them relied on each other. There must have been a lot of stories that happened. Sylvia let go of Morrison's ear. Then, she realized something was wrong. The leather armor in front of her chest was wet. When she fell on the ground, it was covered in mud. Damn it! Why is it so wet here? The dew from yesterday was so heavy. This time, everyone couldn't hold it in anymore. Everyone burst into laughter. Actually, camping in the wild wasn't a good thing at all. Because of the improper posture, it was understandable that one would drool while sleeping. The problem was that it shouldn't be displayed so openly. Morrison sighed and turned over to sleep on the ground again. He could only use the ostrich tactic. Could he not get up? What are you guys laughing at? Sylvia stomped her foot and said angrily. All right. Han Jin quickly came out to smooth things over. Michelle, it should be enough, right? Yes, it's done. I also brought some bread. Let's make do with it, Michelle replied with a smile. Hearing that it was time to eat, Morrison's got up reluctantly. As a melee professional, he couldn't go against his own stomach. Otherwise, his combat ability would be greatly reduced. Michelle didn't prepare a lot of food. However, in this winter, Han Jin's power had greatly increased. His total energy was close to 100 units. He no longer relied on food to replenish his energy. Without such an unfathomable consumer, the food was enough to fill everyone's stomachs. Michelle's workload also became lighter. Reg, you are from Bite Man, so you should be very familiar with this place. Where do you think we should go at this time? Hanjin asked suddenly while eating the bread. Reg, you're from Bite Man and should be familiar with this place. Little Joseph was feeding Leger. Hearing Hanjin's question, he withdrew his hand and stepped aside. Leger hurriedly swallowed the food in his mouth. Then, he pondered for a moment. Let's go to Ninth Town. Is it safe there? Ninth Town is in the rear of the capital. It should be safe there. I have a friend there who will take care of us. With your identity, aren't you afraid of getting him into trouble? Hanjin asked in a low voice. Leger's expression changed. Then he sighed. Then we'd better go to the capital. Although Bite City is called the City of Treachery and has been laughed at by people for a long time, its defense is still very strong. The Vampire Guard can't take it down. In fact, what we need is a quiet place. Bite City is too big. It's inconvenient. Hanjin smiled. As long as we don't contact your friend in public, it should be fine. You mean to go to Ninth Town? Leger asked. Yes. Leger was a bit confused. Since they had decided to go to Ninth Town, why did they say so much? Pack up. We'll set off right away, Hanjin said in a low voice. He always believed that if you wanted to see through a person, you couldn't wait until the moment of life and death. That would be too late. In fact, it was possible to understand a person's integrity from a small point of view. If Leger had explained how capable and loyal his friend was, he would have thought that Leger was untrustworthy. However, Leger immediately changed his mind and didn't want to get his friend into trouble. This was enough to prove Leger's character. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 84. Some people liken war to a game of chess. Actually, compared to the various changes on the chessboard, war was much more complicated. Zagund had placed the Vampire Guard behind the Beatmen's back with the intention of delaying the Beatmen's counterattack and disrupting the Beatmen's plan. However, no one, including Zagund himself, had anticipated the changes that followed. If Zagund was the most notorious lord in the area, then the Vampire Guard was the most notorious army in the area. Things like rape and pillage were simply too mild for the Vampire Guard. Brave men eat barbarians' meat when hungry, drink the blood of Xiongnu with laughter. These were only two lines of poetry used to express and vent a deep-rooted hatred. However, the Vampire Guard had turned all the unimaginable and unimaginable things into reality. In the past, the Vampire Guard was a mad dog, but the chains were always in Zagund's hands. They would only move when Zagund ordered them to bite people. After biting people, they would obediently lie down at Zagund's feet. But now the Vampire Guard had completely gone out of control. Not to mention Zagund, who was far away in the underground city. Even the commander of the Vampire Guard was unable to restrain his subordinates or even find his own subordinates. After the tyranny that had been suppressed by Zagund was released without restraint, the Vampire Guard had completely gone crazy. They had already forgotten their goal and mission, and were only killing for the sake of killing. Inside and outside the mountains, on the plains, beside the river, everywhere was a bloodbath. Even their master, Zagund, was caught unprepared, not to mention Hanjin and the rest. The road to the north could be said to be difficult. On the first day, they could still summarize their experiences and think about tomorrow's arrangements and countermeasures. On the second day, they felt very tired. On the third day, they had already become numb. Small-scale attacks were everywhere, all the time. Sometimes, one or two vampires would dare to attack them with a sinister smile. Of course, when they discovered that the situation was not right, the vampires would use their fastest speed to escape. As for whether they could make the vampires stay, that would depend on Hanjin and the rest's ability and cooperation. The most painful thing was that they had a huge burden on their backs. In the massacre of the Vampire Guard, there would be more or less a few survivors. They would spread the news to the other villages, and then the villagers would start to escape. On the road, there were such people everywhere. The vampires' energy was limited, and they could not vent it all day long. This also gave the people a chance to survive. Most intelligent life forms were social creatures, especially in times of crisis. They would always gather together spontaneously. Behind Hanjin and the rest, there was a tale like this. There were about 400 to 500 villagers following closely behind them. Needless to say, everyone knew how serious the situation was because they were being attacked more and more. With such a large tail, the vampires would discover them from afar. It was unbearable. Should they use violence to chase all the villagers away? It had to be admitted that everyone had this idea, but before they could say it, they rejected it themselves. Faced with the faces and eyes that longed for survival, no one could harden their hearts. When survival had become a luxury, this reality itself had a kind of infectious power that was enough to move most people. Of course, from the initial annoyance, to the later helplessness, and then to the current acceptance of fate, there was a process of change in attitude. It cannot be done overnight because everyone had the instinct to avoid disaster and seek good luck. At this point, they really had no choice. At noon on the 5th day, Hanjin and the rest stopped to prepare lunch. The villagers behind them also took the opportunity to sit down and rest. After another annoying morning, no one said a word during lunch. They were really too tired. Damn it, where did the Beatman's army go? Morrison's suddenly cursed fiercely. I'm very suspicious. Did the Bite Man really prepare for war? It's already been a few days. Why hasn't there been any reaction? Sunir laughed bitterly. They prepared for the whole winter. It should be about time, right? Sasu said slowly. Everyone was silent. No one could answer Sasu's question. Leger opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but swallowed his words. At this moment, a little girl around 5 or 6 years old ran over with small steps. She stood a few meters away, sucking on her fingers, and looked at everyone quietly. Little guy, what's the matter? Sasu asked with a smile. Yes. The little girl nodded vigorously, then ran over to Sasu. She took out a handful of beans from her pocket and handed it to Sasu. Sasu was stunned. He stretched out his right hand, and the little girl placed the beans in Sasu's palm. Then, she took out another handful, but the capacity of her little pocket was very limited. This time, she only took out a few beans. The little girl giggled and ran back with small steps. A young couple came up and grabbed the little girl. Their faces were full of flattering smiles, but this world was very harsh on them. They had never been given a chance to interact with powerful people, so their expressions were very stiff. I told you not to disturb the adults. Why didn't you listen to me? The young couple scolded the little girl. The little girl looked very wronged, and her big eyes were filled with tears. Don't scold her. Little Joseph couldn't stand it anymore and shouted. The couple was shocked. They quickly nodded and bowed to little Joseph with a smile. Although little Joseph was young, he was able to be with adults. Naturally, he was a great little adult. Not bad little guy. You know how to care for a girl at this age? Morrison's laughed strangely. Little Joseph blushed, lowered his head, and didn't say anything. Haha, did you see that? This little guy is blushing. It seems like he really knows. Morrison seemed to have found a treasure. Knows what? Sylvia said fiercely. Do you think everyone is like you? You don't know how to care for people. What? What did I do? What do you think? All right. Everyone is watching. Hanjin said softly. It seemed like he should find a chance to talk to Sylvia. This was not good for men, but he didn't know if Sylvia would accept his suggestion. Sasu played with the beans in his hand. He reached out and picked one up. When he was about to put it into his mouth, Sunir suddenly said, Think carefully before you eat. This isn't a normal bean. It's a life-risking fruit. Sasu was stunned. He immediately understood what Sunir meant. Life-risking fruit? So what? He had already put the bean into his mouth. Hanjin sighed in his heart. From a purely beneficial point of view, they should think of a way to drive the villagers away. The more people there were, the higher the chance of encountering vampires. However, his idea couldn't be approved, and he didn't have the heart to do so. If they encountered hundreds of vampires attacking the villagers, they definitely wouldn't try to save them. It was purely a suicide mission. The current crisis was hidden and invisible, so everyone was very relaxed. Do you guys want to eat? Sasu said with a smile. Life-risking fruit, is it? I'll try it too. Morrison's University grabbed a small handful and put it all into his mouth. Raphael, how about you? Sassu put his hand in front of Hanjin. Hanjin smiled. He had used various methods to test others, so naturally, others would test him. This was very normal. Hanjin grabbed the rest of the beans and said softly, "I haven't eaten this kind of thing before. Don't fight with me." Sunir wasn't in a hurry to say anything. She just sat there quietly. When it came to personal experience, perhaps no one here had the qualifications to compare with her. The hardships and bloodshed of thousands of miles of battles and narrow escapes were unimaginable to ordinary people. It was also because of this that she developed a maverick personality. "I only hope that we won't encounter a large group of vampires," Sunir said slowly. "Our luck won't be that bad. Besides, didn't the vampire guard already scatter?" Sassu shook his head. After being taught by the little girl, the villagers suddenly found a good way to communicate with the adults. One after another, children ran over and put all kinds of food around everyone. Some children even threw some copper coins and even silver coins. The temporary camp was a bit chaotic. "Stillberg, clean up. We'll take the food and return the money," Hanjin said. Stillberg hurriedly jumped up and asked the children to take the money. Hanjin and the others were all rich people. This amount of money was just a drop in the ocean for them, but it was not a small expense for the villagers. The villagers temporarily elected a few elders to talk to Stillberg. They said that it was a small gift from everyone and asked Stillberg to accept it. Of course, Stillberg wouldn't accept it. The two sides argued until their faces turned red. Stillberg had probably never been respected like this in the past 10 years. He didn't know whether it was because he was excited or anxious, but his face turned red. At this moment, a series of soft hissing sounds came from afar. Everyone's expression changed slightly. They looked up into the sky and saw a few black dots flying closer and closer. In a moment, they were above the crowd and kept circling around. "Damn it, these annoying monsters. They don't even let us rest for a moment." Morrison's cursed and stood up with his greatsword. The crowd was in chaos. The villagers rushed towards Hanjin and the others with their children. The past few days had clearly taught them that the closer they were to the adults, the safer they would be. Sunir quickly drew her longbow. She didn't even aim. She raised her hand and shot an arrow. A faint black light streaked across the sky. The vampire that became the target flapped his wings and dove down diagonally, dodging Sunir's arrow. He then folded his wings and fell into the crowd like a stone. "Get out of the way!" Morrison's roared and rushed forward, but the crowd rushed towards him like crazy. He couldn't move at all. Chapter 85. Sunir was a little annoyed. She pulled out a magic arrow, but the rest of the vampires had already swooped down when they saw the archer. By the time Sunir pulled back her bow, it was already too late for her to aim. The vampires became very excited when they landed in the crowd. Since they were surrounded by ordinary people, they could unleash their full power. They slithered through the crowd like fish, and every time they waved their claws, they would take away a life. Screams of agony could be heard everywhere. Hearing the screams of their companions, the crowd became even more frightened. They ran around aimlessly, shouting, and even collided with each other. Those who were weaker were knocked to the ground, and then mercilessly stepped on by dozens of feet. It was a little sad that they were not killed by the vampires, but were trampled to death by their companions. Morrison's was very anxious, but he could not catch up with the vampires, nor could he catch them. Sassu and Sunir could only stare at them. They could not lock onto them, so naturally they could not attack. Hanjin shouted with all his might, "Get down!" Many people heard Hanjin's shout and hurriedly got down on the ground. Those who did not hear him noticed the strange behavior of their companions and subconsciously fell to the ground. Although their movements were not orderly, they still succeeded in making the vampires stand out. "Die!" Morrison's university shouted. The sword in his hand turned into a beautiful river of stars, rolling towards the vampire closest to him. The vampire bared his fangs and revealed a very ugly smile. His figure quickly retreated. Morrison's leaped into the air again and chased after the vampire. Seeing that Morrison's had locked onto him, The vampire's face became even more ferocious. He let out a sharp scream, and the other two vampires simultaneously surrounded Morrison's. Morrison's was not afraid at all. Just as the two sides were about to collide, a dazzling light exploded. Countless golden rays shot out like arrows and nailed everything within a radius of dozens of meters. The crowd, vampires, and Morrison's all turned golden. The three vampires screamed at the same time, but Morrison's was not affected at all. His sword suddenly sped up, and the bright starlight penetrated the vampire's chest and came out from his back, bringing with it a rain of black and red blood. Teamwork also needed to be honed through actual combat. During the previous few encounters with the vampires, it was always Han Jin who released his magic first, followed by Morrison's and the others who attacked. The advantage of this was that the battle was always easy. The disadvantage was that the powerful vampires could adjust in time, escape in time, and then find their companions to come back for revenge. Therefore, Han Jin and the others had already changed the steps of their cooperation. They would either not attack, or they would make sure to annihilate all of them. Sunia released her finger, and a sharp arrow shot out. It accurately shot into the ear of a vampire and pierced deeply into it. The vampire staggered a few steps and fell down on top of a woman in her 20s. The woman didn't dare to raise her head. Suddenly, she felt something sticky on her neck and couldn't help but scream in fright. Sasu raised his wand at the same time, and a twisted bolt of lightning fell from the sky and hit the last vampire. If it was against ghosts, not counting Han Jin who could release strange magic, Sasua's attack was the sharpest in the team. However, it was not enough to deal with vampires. The lightning bolt could only tickle them. Morrison's tried to pull out his sword and kill the last vampire. At this moment, the vampire in front of him suddenly grabbed the edge of the sword. The nails on its right hand pierced through the air, making a sharp whistling sound as it tried to grab Morrison's wrist. Morrison's university was shocked. He hurriedly let go of the sword and took a few steps back. The vampire's eyes were glowing red, and it stared at Morrison's. Its gaze was filled with hatred. Its left hand tightly grasped the edge of the sword and pulled it out bit by bit. Morrison's sword left a transparent hole in the vampire's body. After the sword was pulled out, the vampire could even see what was behind it. Streams of viscous dark red blood flowed out from the hole, but the vampire stood firmly and did not move at all. It was as if its legs were rooted to the ground. How is this possible? Morrison's was very surprised. Along the way, they had killed many vampires, but this was the first time they had seen such a strong one. The vampire took a deep breath, then opened its mouth and spat out a green ball towards Morrison's. Ah! Amidst the screams, a woman suddenly jumped up. That green thing happened to stick to her back, and the woman's movements came to an abrupt halt. A thick fog rose from her body, and her skin and muscles were corroded at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, she became a pale white skeleton. Morrison's was not the only one who was shocked. Sasu and the others were also dumbfounded. Sunir drew her bow and silently shot an arrow. The vampire suddenly raised its arm in front of its face, and the arrow hit the vampire's arm. Huh! The vampire let out a sinister laugh and took another deep breath. Morrison's did not have time to retrieve his sword. He retreated as fast as he could, but his speed was not as fast as the spell. A rain of black and red blood droplets shot out, sweeping across the surrounding people. Morrison's expression changed. He did not know what kind of spell this was, nor did he know if his combat aura could protect him. However, the area covered by the rain of blood was too large, and there was no way he could avoid it. At this moment, a wooden golem appeared in front of Morrison's. Although it was forced back by the rain of blood, it firmly blocked Morrison's path. Screams of pain rang out. Those who were ordered to lie on the ground were not as lucky as Morrison's. About 30 people were hit by the rain of black and red blood droplets. They all rolled around, struggled, and screamed. The vampire straightened its body and took another deep breath. A dazzling golden light suddenly shone, and then a silent arrow approached the vampire under the cover of the golden light. No matter how strong the vampire's body was, its eyes were weak. Under the illumination of the golden light, it could only close its eyes. Sunir's arrow flashed and shot into the vampire's open mouth. Following that, a flame shot up into the sky, turning the vampire into a man of fire from inside out. The vampire let out a shrill cry. It could no longer cast any spells. If the flames were burning outside its body, it might be able to resist the damage. However, if the flames were burning inside its body, it would be a different story. The last vampire wanted to help attack, but when it saw its comrade releasing the rain of black and red blood, it hurriedly retreated to the side. Obviously, it was also afraid of that kind of magic. Now that it saw its comrade's fate, it knew that there was no need to continue fighting. It immediately transformed into a strange-looking bat, spread its wings, and fled into the sky. Sasu had finished chanting the long incantation. Seeing that his chosen opponent was about to escape, he sneered. He pointed the magic staff in his hand at the sky. The bat screamed and fell straight to the ground. It flapped its wings with all its might, but it could not fly. For anything that could fly, the gravity spell was an irresistible magic. Dragons could ignore the attacks of ordinary gravity spells because of their incomparably strong magic resistance. Otherwise, they would also fall from the sky. Morrison's rushed forward. He spun around and picked up the giant sword that the vampire had thrown. The giant sword released a dazzling light once again. Morrison's body brushed past the vampire's body. A head that was still burning flew into the sky. The vampire swayed and fell to the ground. Morrison's continued to rush forward. The bright blade of the sword came down. The struggling bat saw that the situation was not good and returned to its vampire form. Before it could get up, a ball of golden light bloomed in front of it. In the next moment, Morrison's sword had landed on its head. The hardness of the vampire's head was far beyond Morrison's expectations. With a loud bang, his sword bounced off the vampire's head. The vampire was heavily smashed to the ground by the force of gravity and the huge impact. However, Morrison's had the advantage of using his sword to test the hardness of the vampire's head. Morrison's raised his sword again and stabbed it down with lightning speed. The tip of the sword pierced through the vampire's neck and pierced deep into the ground, nailing the vampire to the ground. Hanjin slowly walked over and waved his hand. A talisman floated toward the vampire. When the talisman landed on the vampire's body, it suddenly turned into a golden curtain of light and enveloped the vampire. The vampire struggled for a moment, then stopped moving. Hanjin secretly heaved a sigh of relief. These vampires were very powerful. In the past, he only needed to cast a pure light charm to end the battle. Today, he had cast it several times. Fortunately, there were only 3 vampires. If there were more, the consequences would be unimaginable. The cries of the crowd gradually subsided. Of course, they could not return to normal. The silence meant that their lives were fading away. What's going on? Can someone tell me how a vampire can cast magic? Morrison's university asked. He was also scared. I don't know. Sunir slowly walked closer. Her eyes looked very serious. I've never heard of a vampire who can cast magic before. Sasu, what about you? Do you know of such vampires? I don't know either. Sasu smiled bitterly. We might have killed a big shot, and then... Sunir stopped talking. Then what? Morrison's asked. Then big trouble will come knocking on our door. Sunir sighed softly. I will update as promised. Friends with monthly tickets, please support me. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 86. Although Hanjin and the others ended the battle in a short period of time, the villagers still suffered heavy casualties. There were about 50 to 60 corpses on the ground. Moreover, no one cared about burying the corpses. Who knew when the vampires would appear again? Hanjin and the others hurriedly packed up the corpses. They didn't care whether the villagers could keep up with them or not. Leger had explained in detail that the west city of the Bite Man was about 150 kilometers northwest. The vampires probably wouldn't dare to attack there, so the most important thing now was to try their best to reduce the time spent on the road. However, at this moment of life and death, the villagers also burst out with their potential. They gritted their teeth and followed behind the group. They walked from noon to dusk. The group of a few hundred people had already stretched to a few miles long, sparsely scattered. Stillberg, little Joseph, and the others couldn't take it anymore. Seeing Han Jin stop and look back, they didn't care whether Han Jin was going to tell them to stop and rest. They first sat down on the ground and gasped for breath. In the whole group, the most relaxed people were probably Leger and Chili. In order to ensure everyone's fighting strength, they couldn't let the others carry Leger. Han Jin released 2 wooden talismans and let the wooden puppet carry one on its back and the other one in its arms. Although it was a bit wasteful, they couldn't be too careful at this time. The villagers who arrived one after the other also sat down on the ground. Some of them even directly lay down, wailing. "Let's rest here today," Sunir said softly. "That's the only way." Han Jin nodded, then slowly sat down on the ground. After the wooden puppet placed Leger and Chili on the ground, its body trembled, then suddenly fell forward and disappeared without a trace. A small grayish-white wooden sculpture rolled into the grass. Little Joseph had good eyesight. He quickly jumped up, found the small wooden sculpture, and respectfully handed it to Han Jin. Han Jin took the wooden sculpture. The Trent's body was green, and so was the wooden talisman. Now, the small wooden sculpture had turned grayish-white, and it was covered with small cracks. With a gentle pinch, a series of small cracking sounds could be heard. In Taoist terms, the spiritual energy on the sculpture had been used up, and the small wooden sculpture had become a piece of rotten wood. "Throw it away. It's useless now." Han Jin smiled. "Can you give it to me?" Little Joseph asked timidly. "What do you want it for?" Han Jin stared blankly. Seeing the hope in little Joseph's eyes, he vaguely understood something. He then took out a wooden talisman from his space ring and drew a few new talismans in the air. If he were to release it himself, he wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. If he were to give it to someone else, then he would have to make up for all the talismans. "This is for you. Take it." For me?" Little Joseph was surprised and happy at the same time. "Yes." Han Jin nodded. "Didn't you learn magic from Sasso? Use your spiritual energy to try to touch it." Little Joseph stared at the wooden talisman. After a while, he said in surprise, "There's a very strange feeling. It's really strange." "Then you can release it now." "Thank you," little Joseph said respectfully. Han Jin looked around and saw that Stillberg's face was full of envy, but he didn't dare to ask for it himself. Han Jin smiled. "Stillberg, come here. There's one for you too." Stillberg happily jumped up. "Young master." Han Jin took out another wooden talisman and completed it. He handed it to Stillberg. "I don't think I need to teach you." "Yes, young master, I will." Stillberg carefully put the talisman in his pocket. "Ahem." Sunir coughed. When Han Jin looked over, she glanced aside. Following Sunir's gaze, Chili and Michelle were staring blankly at Stillberg and little Joseph. Han Jin couldn't help but sigh. Were they eating from the same pot? "Chili, Michelle, come here. You have a share too." Han Jin called. "I don't need it. I'm safe with you guys protecting me." Chili paused for a moment, then smiled. "Who can guarantee that there won't be any mistakes?" Han Jin said slowly. "If we can't help you in time, you can save yourselves. You don't have to be so polite." Sunir smiled. "Raphael is right. I'm just afraid that something unexpected might happen." Chili and Michelle didn't refuse anymore. They walked up to Han Jin, and Han Jin put the 2 modified talismans in their hands. "Raphael, what about mine?" Morrison's came over with a smile. He even put his hand on Han Jin's shoulder to show the close relationship between the two. "Get lost," Han Jin replied without hesitation. "Are you serious? That's so unfair." Morrison's yelled with a long face. "Don't mess around. Making puppets requires magic power," Sunir said. Then she turned to Han Jin. "Raphael, apart from holy light, do you know any other spells that are more powerful?" Sunir also realized that the power of holy light was greatly reduced when dealing with powerful vampires. They had to find another way. Yes. Hanjin nodded. Then why haven't you used it before? Is it because it takes too long to prepare? Sunir was overjoyed. If that's the case, we can protect you with all our strength. How powerful is that spell? If the enemies are all vampires, it should be able to kill hundreds of them, Hanjin said honestly. Then why are we running? Morrison's jumped up. At the current speed, I'll be able to use that spell in 3 years. Damn. Morrison's didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Only then did Sunir realize that she had been teased by Hanjin again. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. The coquettish look in her eyes suddenly brightened up. Hanjin's eyes were sharp. He was curious. What kind of face was hidden behind that mask? It was said that elves were very beautiful. Hanjin said, Sunir, how long have we been together? About half a year. Don't you think it's time for us to see your true face? Maybe we'll be surrounded by vampires soon. At least don't leave us with regrets. Yes, yes. Morrison's agreed with Hanjin's suggestion. He yelled, Sunir, is there a rule in your tribe that you have to marry whoever sees your true face? You've been listening to too many stories from the bards, haven't you? Sunir said calmly. It's fine. I'd like to recommend someone to you. Morrison's acted as if he didn't understand what Sunir meant. He patted Hanjin's shoulder and said, This is Mr. Raphael, a great prophet, a great puppet master, a great priest, a great magician, and a great noble. It's not an insult to be able to gather so many great things in one body, right? Sunir and Hanjin were stunned. They all knew that Morrison's liked to talk nonsense, but what he said was a little too much. It made them feel awkward. They didn't know whether to refute or not. Morrison's saw that the atmosphere was very tense. It was too different from what he had imagined. He quickly changed the topic and said, By the way, if you include the berserk spell, Raphael is also a warrior. Moxing was right. Although Hanjin's physique was not as strong as Moxing's, he was still very strong. Especially after being blessed with the madness, his speed and strength had been greatly improved, but he had no fighting strength. Moxing was right. Although Hanjin's physique was not as strong as Moxing's, he was still very strong. Raphael, how's the research on the berserk spell? Have you made any progress? Morrison's was obviously trying to find something to talk about. As long as he could successfully divert Sunir's attention, it would be fine. He couldn't stand the cold feeling. Unfortunately, Morrison seemed to have forgotten that in order to research the berserk spell, one needed to have a research target. Morrison's was the best target. Hanjin looked at Morrison's seemingly concerned expression and laughed in his heart. He was walking right into the trap, wasn't he? If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten. Don't worry, after we settle down, I'll seriously research it with you. After hearing Hanjin's words, Morrison's realized that he had just climbed out of a hole and immediately fell into a deeper one. He couldn't help but want to cry. But to be honest, this is the first time I've seen someone who can dabble in so many fields. Prophet, puppeteer, priest, and magician. Raphael, how did you do it? Sasu wasn't trying to resolve Morrison's embarrassment. He was just asking a question that everyone wanted to know the answer to. Even Sunir's gaze turned to Hanjin. She also wanted an answer. This is very complicated. Hanjin pondered for a moment. Maybe in the future. We'll talk about it when there's a chance. Everyone was slightly disappointed, but they didn't pursue the matter. This was a personal matter. For example, Sunir had always been wearing a mask. Were they going to force Sunir to take off her mask? Since you're a puppeteer, why don't you create a mount? You should be able to bring many people with you. Leger suddenly broke the silence. Hanjin was stunned. It wasn't that he couldn't do some things, but that he couldn't think of it. He used to create wooden puppets, mainly to protect himself. He had never thought of wasting his energy elsewhere. However, with his current energy absorption speed, the consumption of creating phase was negligible. Just now, you said that if I continue to wear a mask, I'll leave everyone with regrets. Is that right? Sunir softly interjected. Hanjin was stunned. Wasn't the topic over? Why did Sunir bring it up again? Great prophet, please allow me to address you as such for the last time. Sunir revealed a bitter smile. Sunir's words were filled with an ominous feeling. Hanjin suddenly remembered that Sunir had said that everyone was surrounded by vampires. This would leave them with regrets. He hurriedly raised his head and looked towards the sky. Under the faint twilight, a large number of black dots were rapidly flying towards them. There were at least a few hundred of them. Hanjin was immediately dumbfounded. Brothers, I'm in danger now. I'm gradually being pushed out. Those who have monthly votes, please help me. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 87. Morrison's, Sisu, and the others had all turned into statues. Hundreds of vampires formed a dark cloud, surging towards them with an incomparably ferocious aura. Their mood had already reached its lowest point, and the word despair was not enough to describe it. If there were a dozen, or even dozens of vampires, they could still muster up the courage to fight to the death. But now, everything was meaningless. With so many vampires gathered together, it was very likely that there was a monster at the level of the Vampire King among them, not to mention the few of them. Even if there was an 11th grade Supreme Knight leading them in battle, they might not be able to defeat this group of vampires. "Oh my God!" a few of the villagers exclaimed. The rest of the villagers raised their heads and quickly noticed the abnormality in the sky. Some of them screamed, some of them crawled up and ran into the forest, and some of them wailed loudly. Immediately, the situation became chaotic again. "Raphael, you should have a way to leave, right?" Sunir asked softly. Hanjin was stunned. "Go, don't worry about us." Morrison's continued. This warrior, who usually liked to argue and pester people, was surprisingly calm at this moment. After a flash of despair, unwillingness, and other emotions flashed past his eyes, it was filled with a lonely smile. "Young master, you should leave quickly." Stilberg also shouted. "We don't have no chance at all." Hanjin said slowly, "I can let you recover your strength, and then it's useless." Sunir shook her head. "You and Leger may be able to escape, but we can't. Instead of running around like dogs, it's better to fight to the last breath." "How do you know if you don't try?" Hanjin said anxiously. Sunir slowly raised her right hand and took off the mask on her face in a carefree manner. Then she shook her head, and her smooth golden hair flowed down like flowing light. What was hidden behind the mask was a breathtakingly beautiful face. Her snow-white cheeks were extremely delicate, and a pair of pale green eyes were emitting a dazzling radiance. Her curved eyebrows with a golden hexagram between them, her handsome nose bridge, and those round lips formed an incomparably pure picture that made people feel relaxed and happy. "You see, you should have no regrets now, right?" Sunir smiled. Morrison stared blankly at the hexagram between Sunir's eyebrows. "You are a coincidence." Sunir replied softly. "Listen to me." Hanjin was so anxious that the veins on his forehead. "Now listen to me." Sunir interrupted Hanjin. "I don't have anything good here. Magic crystals. You'll find a way in the future, but I'll leave this to you." With that, Sunir took out a small black box from her space ring and handed it to Hanjin. Hanjin didn't take it. He suddenly sighed. "I really don't understand. Why are you so stubborn? Do you still want to protect them?" The thing that Hanjin regretted the most now was being too indecisive. If he had chased away all the villagers earlier, they wouldn't have ended up like this. Sunir didn't say anything. Her right hand was still hanging in the air, holding the small box firmly. At this time, Michel and the others also came over. Sasu whispered, "Raphael, let's go. The result will be the same whether you stay or not." Hanjin suddenly felt very irritated. It had been almost half a year since he came to this world. The biggest reward he gained was making these friends. Was he really going to give up? Of course. He was still very young and could start all over again. But if he were to encounter the same situation again, would he give up again? Listen to everyone. Sunir smiled. She then grabbed Hanjin's hand and tried to put the small box on it. Han Jin backhanded the small box and sent it flying. Fortunately, the small box was very sturdy. It flipped a few times and fell to the ground, but it was still intact. You? Sunir opened her mouth in shock. Han Jin ignored Sunir and looked up at the sky. He couldn't accept leaving now, and he couldn't accept dying for no reason. Instead of dying here, it was better to stay alive and avenge everyone in the future. As for what he should do, Han Jin didn't know. He really didn't know. While they were talking, the black dots were flying closer and closer. Sunir sighed softly and bent down to pick up the small box. Everyone pulled out their swords and held their wands. After all, they were all professionals. Although the difference in strength was too great, no one would stretch their neck and wait for death. The black cloud formed by the vampires didn't stop for a moment. It flew straight over. This strange scene made countless people's brains freeze on the spot. Sasu had already released a magic shield. He held his wand and stared blankly at the sky. He didn't know what to do. Morrison's great sword almost fell to the ground. His mouth was so wide open that it could almost swallow an ordinary person's fist. Han Jin's hands that were rapidly forming seals stiffened. Fortunately, his state of mind was much higher than his current energy level. Otherwise, he might have gone crazy. In contrast, the villagers were the first to react. A burst of cheers erupted from the crowd. Those who were too tired to get up, and those whose faces were still covered in tears, got up one after another. They shouted and jumped around, venting the joy of surviving a disaster. Han Jin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What was this called? They had already been forced to such an extent that they had already started to divide and hand over the inheritance. In the end, the monsters left as quietly as they came. They waved their hands and left without a trace. It turned out that they had just put on a farce. Han Jin turned around and saw that Morrison's, Sunir, and the others all had strange expressions on their faces. Then, his expression should be similar. Han Jin was just about to say something when an idea flashed in his head. He hurriedly shouted, "Morrison's, take the people and keep moving forward. Hurry up. Leger, how are you feeling? Let Morrison's carry you in front and lead the way. We can't walk on the main road anymore. Try to walk on the smaller paths." "I can do it," Leger hurriedly replied. Seeing that Han Jin was anxious, Morrison's didn't ask any more questions. He shouted, "If you don't want to die, get up now and follow me. Hurry up. Sunir, you stay here with me." Han Jin paused. "Who has a mirror?" "What kind of mirror?" Chili asked. "Any kind. I have two here." Chili hurriedly took out a small mirror from her pocket and another from her bag. She handed it to Han Jin. "Who else has a mirror?" Han Jin shouted. Seeing that Han Jin needed a mirror, the villagers all gathered around. A moment later, there were more than 10 small mirrors in Han Jin's hands. He picked out 9 of them that were about the same size. Although these mirrors were all different in shape and quality, he couldn't be picky anymore. Han Jin's fingers quickly moved in the air, drawing one talisman after another. In the end, he sealed all the talismans in the mirrors. When the villagers saw that Morrison's hurriedly asked everyone to follow him, they knew that something was wrong. They all struggled to get up and follow behind Morrison's. The surroundings gradually became quiet. Han Jin glanced around and shouted in a low voice, "Go." Then he threw all 9 mirrors out. The 9 mirrors spun rapidly in the air. With a boom, they turned into 9 dazzling rays of light and flew in all directions. They flew 100 meters away and landed on the ground at the same time. "What kind of magic did you cast?" Sunir asked in surprise. "A little trick to trick people." Han Jin looked at Sunir. In the past, when he chatted with Sunir, Sunir always looked indifferent. Now that she took off her mask, he realized that Sunir's face was full of expressions. Sunir saw that Han Jin was staring at her. She felt a little uncomfortable and put the mask back on her face. "Why are you still wearing that thing? What do you know?" Sunir said coldly. Han Jin smiled. "Lend me that green magic crystal again." Sunir threw the magic crystal to him and said, "Try to hurry up. I'm in more of a hurry than you are." Han Jin said with a smile. He thought about the various charms in Chapter Ding. A of the Inner Secret, and selected a suitable one. He then took out a piece of tree folk wood that had been cut and began to carve it carefully. Not long after, a lifelike little turtle appeared in Han Jin's hand. Han Jin drew a black tortoise holy charm and cast it on the little turtle. Then, he threw the little turtle out. A terrifying wave of energy swept across the field. Suddenly, a giant creature appeared in the field. It was a turtle that had been magnified thousands of times. Its back was about 3 meters tall, and its huge shell was more than 5 meters in diameter. The surface of the turtle's shell was very flat. It was big enough for a dozen people to sit on, or even more. Although Sunir was mentally prepared, she was still shocked by this giant creature. She took 2 steps back. "What is this thing?" Han Jin jumped onto the turtle's back and smiled. "Come on up." The 3-meter height was not a problem for Sunir. In the next moment, Sunir gently landed on the turtle's back. She curiously touched it a few times. "I've never heard of this kind of puppet. It should be very strong, right?" "It's not that strong. To me, it's just a carriage." Han Jin pointed. The giant turtle began to move, and it ran faster and faster. Sunir slowly sat down. The giant turtle had already left the main road and was running on the desolate field. However, the turtle's back was surprisingly stable. She could only feel a slight bump. "Why haven't you made this kind of thing before?" Sunir asked. She was a bit dissatisfied. She had been running until she was sweating. Just thinking about it made her feel wronged. "How should I put it? I have too many things here." Han Jin pointed at his head. "If it wasn't for Leger reminding me today, I wouldn't have remembered it." Han Jin bitterly smiled. "You mean you've mastered too many spells?" "Yes," Han Jin casually replied. Sunir smiled. However, her tone was not very friendly. She felt that Han Jin was too arrogant. "Didn't you say that you wanted to see how far I could go?" Han Jin smiled. "I promise, this is not the first surprise, and it won't be the last." To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 88. Morrison's, Sisu, and the others suddenly heard a strange noise behind them. When they turned around, they were stunned. There were about 8 or 9 giant beasts forming a caravan. Han Jin and Sunir were standing on the back of the first giant beast, looking down at them. "What is this?" Morrison's yelled. "Come up first." Han Jin stopped the giant tortoise. Morrison's, Chi Li, and the others all climbed onto the back of the giant tortoise. Following Han Jin's gesture, the giant tortoise slowly stood up and ran forward. Morrison squinted and looked behind them. All the villagers had squeezed onto the tortoise's back. Maybe it was because they were grateful, or maybe they were too excited, but there was a faint whimper. Chi Li curiously moved closer to Han Jin. She touched the rough tortoise and asked, "What kind of magic beast is this?" Note, it's a black tortoise. Because it needs to be spoken, one word is removed. Stand outside if you think too much. "I don't know what it's called either," Han Jin said, shaking his head. The 4 sacred beasts were the names of the Taoists. He could not explain it to Chi Li. "Raphael, I hate you," Morrison said, gritting his teeth. "Why didn't you use it earlier?" "I already asked him," Sunir said, smiling. "How did he explain it?" "He said that he had mastered too many spells, so he didn't think of it immediately. Thanks to Leger, he reminded him. How many spells do you know?" Morrison's yelled. "Now, use them one by one. Then we'll tell you when to do what." "Unfortunately, I don't have any more magic power now. Otherwise, I could turn someone into a statue. Who should I experiment on?" Han Jin thought. Morrison's expression changed. He suddenly remembered that some buffs and effects could only be cast after the caster's spiritual power was locked onto a living being. In other words, if he continued to force Han Jin, he would definitely become a target. Morrison's laughed awkwardly. "Ha! Don't be so serious. We're just joking." "I think you're right," Han Jin said, smiling. Morrison's was a bit nervous. He looked around and finally fixed his eyes on Sasu. Sasu was both angry and amused. He said softly, "Raphael, did you waste a lot of your magic power releasing these beasts?" I didn't think that you would be so soft-hearted. It has nothing to do with me. Hanjin pointed at Sunir. He still felt sorry for the magic power he had used. If she didn't cry and make a fuss, what did you say? Sunir said angrily. Hanjin chuckled. Although they used to work well together, Sunir always had a mask on her face. There was always a sense of estrangement. Now that Sunir had shown her real face, the estrangement gradually disappeared. In the past, no one would joke about Sunir under normal circumstances. As expected of a kind elf, Morrison's praised. Raphael, have you used up all your magic power? Can you still fight? Sasu asked. No problem. Hanjin's smile suddenly froze on his face. He sensed that a group of vampires had broken into the mirror and were chasing in their direction. Heaven and Earth Chaos, 9 Palaces Illusion, activate. Hanjin chanted the incantation and yelled. In the distance, the 9 small mirrors suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and beams of light shot into the deep starry sky. The group of flying vampires suddenly felt their vision blur, and then the whole world changed. Above, below, left, and right there were specks of starlight everywhere. The formation of the vampires immediately became chaotic, and they did not know where to fly. When pilots or migratory birds were flying on the sea at night, they were most afraid of encountering such a situation. The former would crash the plane and kill the passengers, while the latter would crash into the sea in groups. Their senses would be seriously inverted. This phenomenon was known as the graveyard spiral. As the name suggested, one could imagine how terrible it was when one's senses were inverted. For the group of vampires, they had never encountered such a situation since they mastered the flying technique. Their formation went from chaotic to chaotic, and in the end, it was complete chaos. They even kept colliding with each other. Those with physical strength were almost knocked down like stones, but they desperately flapped their wings and flew up again. Then they were knocked down again. Even the vampire commander was confused. Some vampires locked onto a star and desperately flew forward. It was a good idea to lock onto a reference star, but the position of the illusory stars was constantly changing. As a result, the vampires kept flying in circles. Some went up and down, some went left and right. They all thought that they were right and screamed for their companions to follow them. In the end, it became more and more chaotic. Sunir noticed that Hanjin's expression was a little strange. She hurriedly asked, "What's wrong?" "Those vampires have caught up." Hanjin let out a long sigh. Morrison's, Sisu, and the others suddenly turned around and looked back. "What are you looking at?" "They are now trapped by my magic array." "Trapped?" Sasu said in surprise and joy. "How long can you trap them?" "It's hard to say. It depends on luck." Hanjin said with a bitter smile. "If we are lucky, we can trap them until dawn. If we are unlucky, they will catch up immediately." His energy was limited, and the materials he could use were very poor. Therefore, the 9 Palaces illusionary light array could not exert its power. The vampires fell to the ground from time to time. As long as one of the vampires happened to break any of the mirrors, the 9 Palaces illusionary light array would immediately collapse. Even if the mirrors were intact, the vampires that fell to the ground could walk out of the range of the 9 Palaces illusionary light array if they closed their eyes and kept walking forward. The problem was, when would they be able to calm down? "Depends on luck?" "What does that mean?" Sasu asked, puzzled. With his understanding of magic, it was either possible or impossible. What was the use of luck? "Let's talk about it later." Hanjin looked back at Leger. "Leger, you lead the way. The farther we are from the main road, the safer it is." Can I control it?" Leger asked in surprise. "Just tell me where to go." Hanjin was the last person who liked to gamble on luck. It felt uncontrollable, but this time, he won the gamble. He ran until the giant tortoise's spiritual energy ran out. Then he made another 8 or 9 giant tortoises. In the end, after running for an entire night, the vampires still did not catch up. They could vaguely see a village in front of them, and the giant tortoise's spiritual energy was exhausted again. Hanjin jumped down from the giant tortoise's back. The whole team stopped as well. He really did not have the energy to make more charms. For an entire night, Morrison's and the others could eat and sleep. Only he and Leger could not. Leger only needed to tell him where to go, but he had to divide his spiritual energy to firmly control the 9 giant tortoises. He was already exhausted. The 2 batches of Black Tortoise Sacred Spell had cost him almost 10,000 yuan of energy. His total energy was only slightly more than 100 units. He would be lying to himself if he said he did not feel the pinch. However, seeing the emotions of the villagers and the others, he felt a little bit better. Sunir, Sisu, and the others jumped down to the ground. Morrison's, Sylvia, and the mercenaries were still sleeping. Han Jin was a little annoyed because it was too unfair. He waved his hand, and the giant tortoises suddenly disappeared. Morrison's and the others fell from the sky and landed on the ground with a loud thud. However, Morrison's physique was undeniable. He was extremely strong. He jumped up from the ground and shouted, "What's going on? The vampires are here." "It's nothing." The golem's effect suddenly disappeared. Han Jin smiled. "Yeah, it was very sudden." Sunir sighed softly. Sylvia could not tell anything was wrong. She only knew that she was unlucky. Morrison's looked at Han Jin and Sunir suspiciously. Why didn't the other golems disappear? Only ours disappeared? I don't know. Morrison's opened his mouth, but the situation was too much for him. He could only mumble something and sit down in the wilderness. To be honest, he was still very, very tired. "Sasu, go to the town in front and ask where we are," Han Jin said. "Okay." Sasu nodded. "I'll go too." Leger stood up. "Your injury. It's not a problem for me to walk." Leger smiled. He was too ashamed to eat and drink, so he just wanted to do something. "Then you two go together. Be careful," Han Jin said softly. "You saved us all." Sunir watched Sasu and Leger leave and said slowly, "I also did it to save myself." Han Jin smiled. "A few months ago, you were able to escape from hundreds of nights in the Holy Crown City. You must have some special magic, right? I wonder, can those vampires really hurt you?" "I escaped alone." Han Jin paused. "But my wealth is still here. Should I abandon everything?" "Wealth? Do you mean, for example, Stillberg, Morrison's?" Han Jin smiled. "And you, Chili?" Sunir was angry and amused at the same time. If Han Jin was serious, how could he compare people to private wealth? If Han Jin was joking, he really didn't abandon them. Friendship is priceless. Sunir rolled her eyes at Han Jin. "Of course, so I can't give up anyway." "You?" Sunir looked at Han Jin's profile. Half a year ago, Han Jin was just an ordinary prophet without any prediction ability. Now, Han Jin set up a magic circle to trap those vampires and release the puppet beasts to help them escape. Without Han Jin, they would have been in big trouble. In such a short time, he had become a mainstay of the team from an ordinary person. His growth was really impressive. Chapter 89. Not long after, Sasu and Leger hurried back. Leger said with a face full of joy, "I didn't expect that we would be able to travel so far in one night. And the direction is right. We'll reach the west side of the city in another 20 miles or so." "The west side should be safe, right?" Han Jin asked. "It's fine." Leger nodded. "Even if the vampire guard is gathered here, it'll be hard to take the west side of the city. Stillberg, go tell the villagers that the west side of the city is just ahead. Tell them to keep moving." "Yes, young master." Stillberg jumped up and ran to the back. "Leger, are you okay?" Han Jin's gaze fell on Leger. Leger was surprised, but he immediately understood what Han Jin meant. He pondered for a while and said, "Don't worry, they won't recognize me. I have my own way." "Good. Everyone get ready." Han Jin glanced around and said, "Sylvia, come with me. I have something to tell you." Everyone was surprised, especially Morrison's, who was half awake. He opened his eyes wide and stared blankly at Han Jin. Sylvia didn't care about anything and followed Han Jin to the side. Han Jin only said a few words, and Sylvia's face suddenly turned red. Her actions became even more bashful and shy. Morrison's eyes widened, and the veins on his forehead throbbed. He scratched his ears and cheeks. He wanted to rush over with his greatsword and ask what was going on, but he trusted Sylvia and Hanjin. He was in a dilemma. Even Sunir was curious. She held her breath, and her two pointed ears moved from time to time, trying to find a voice. You don't know, but Morrison's is going crazy. Don't look, don't look. This means that Morrison's really cares about you. Haha, if I do something, he might rush up and kill you. I'm not trying to make things difficult for you, but you shouldn't do this unless you want to chase Morrison's away from you. Dealing with men is like taming a horse. You can't always hold onto the reins, and you can't always use the whip. Do you know what men usually put first when evaluating women? Gentleness. Women can be ugly, but they can't not be gentle. Try this method. You'll be surprised. Sunir almost laughed out loud. She couldn't help but look at Morrison's sympathetically. Morrison's was nowhere near Han Jin's intelligence. With Han Jin helping Sylvia, Morrison's future should be very bleak. After a while, Han Jin and Sylvia came back. Morrison's hurriedly asked, "You two, what were you talking about over there?" "We were talking about the mercenary group." Han Jin smiled. He couldn't tease Morrison's anymore. Otherwise, he might really turn hostile. "It's none of your business." Sylvia proudly rolled her eyes at Morrison's. She could see that Morrison's was very nervous and anxious. She was secretly delighted. Why can't I care?" Morrison's was even more anxious. The key was Sylvia's expression just now. He had known Sylvia for so many years, but he had never seen Sylvia show such a shy expression. He felt like his chest was going to explode. Ahem. Han Jin coughed dryly. What a waste of words. He had repeated countless times just now. Women have to be gentle, 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 gentle. Did Sylvia listen carefully? Aya. Sylvia suddenly reacted. She tried her best to put on an affectionate expression and even winked at him. There are so many people here. I'll talk to you later, okay? Can you please? Sasu and the others were all stunned. They were familiar with Sylvia, who was always energetic. When had Sylvia ever shown such an expression? Even Morrison's was stunned. After a while, he stuttered, "Are you all right? Did you accidentally get bitten by a vampire?" Sylvia was furious. She wanted to punch Morrison's in the face and stomp on his face. However, Han Jin's words were still beside her ears. She tried her best to control her emotions. She twisted her body and said coquettishly, "You're so annoying." However, she was a little too strong. She actually knocked Morrison's over. At this time, the villagers knew that the west side of the city was about 20 miles ahead. They rushed towards Han Jin and the others. Since they were about to part ways, they wanted to express their gratitude. However, they were different from the nobles. They had almost no education, and their vocabulary was very limited. They kept saying thank you over and over again. A few of the leaders even asked the villagers to pay Han Jin and the others. However, Han Jin did not care about this small amount of money. He did not protect the villagers for the sake of money. Both sides pushed and pushed for a long time. In the end, Sunir persuaded them that they would not be able to find a job in the west side of the city. They still had to rely on that small amount of money to survive. Only then did the villagers take the money back. After that, they continued to drag things out for a long time. Han Jin's head was sweating. He was not used to this kind of scene and was a little annoyed. The other side said, "Thank you." This side said, "You're welcome." The other side said, "Thank you again." He said, "Don't be so polite again." Then the other side said, "Thank you again." In the end, Han Jin was speechless. He wanted to hit someone. After sending the villagers off with great difficulty, Han Jin purposely waited for a while to avoid bumping into them again. They first went to the village in front of them to have some food before continuing on the main road. Other than Han Jin, who was a little listless, everyone was in a good mood. After all, they had rested for a whole night. They chatted and laughed loudly as they hurried on. Morrison's had already forgotten about the unpleasantness just now. He chatted happily with Sylvia and even walked to the front. Perhaps this was the instinct of a warrior. The others could just watch from behind. If they had known that there were countless vampires gathered 30 miles behind them, desperately searching for something, they would have started running away. Due to their special physique, vampires would not sweat under normal circumstances. However, the vampire named Blake was sweating profusely at this moment. His hands and feet were trembling slightly. "You still haven't found it?" Caroline said coldly. In order to catch the culprit and avenge her child, she did not hesitate to personally participate in the pursuit. "Why don't you look elsewhere?" "My lady, they can't have gone far," Blake replied firmly. "There are almost 400 of them in total. They don't have any carriages. Although we are trapped by that strange magic formation, they can't have gone more than 10 miles in this period of time. I'm guessing they must be hiding in the magic formation. You're saying that they're still nearby?" "Definitely, my lady. I'm willing to guarantee it with my life." Caroline nodded slightly. She trusted her subordinate's judgment. That team was made up of a mercenary team and hundreds of villagers. If the mercenary team did not care about the lives of the villagers and escaped alone, they might be able to escape far away. However, it was impossible for the villagers to escape, and it was impossible for all of them to disappear. They must be hiding somewhere. On the other side, Han Jin and his companions were approaching the West City. After the internal division of the Bite Man, all the Castellans had spared no expense in running their own nests. The defense facilities of the West City were not much worse than those of the capital Bite Man city. The tall city walls were all built with special bricks, which were the corundum made by alchemists. They had extremely strong physical and magical defense. 2 magic crystal cannons were placed near each city gate. As for the power of the magic crystal cannons, the distance, and the equivalent consumption of the magic crystals, these were military secrets. Behind the city walls, there were rows of magic defense towers and arrow towers. Such a grand scene would make people dumbfounded. It even made people wonder if there were so many magicians in the West City. The city gate was heavily guarded. About hundreds of fully armed soldiers were checking the pedestrians. The outside of the city was crowded with people who wanted to enter, but almost no one wanted to leave. The news of the large-scale invasion of the Vampire Guard had spread out. Although the West City did not have enough soldiers to encircle and annihilate the vampires, it should not be a problem to protect the main city. Of course, this depended on how determined the vampires were. After waiting for a long time, it was finally Han Jin and his companions' turn. When the soldiers of the West City saw the badge on Morrison's chest, they immediately smiled and welcomed Han Jin and his companions in without even checking. They knew that if the vampires really wanted to besiege the West City, these mercenaries would definitely help the West City. In the past, they did not welcome mercenaries. The mercenaries were too flamboyant and did not like to be restrained. They would cause trouble every day. But now, they really hoped that the mercenaries would gather in the West City. If there were enough mercenaries, they could spread out the regular army and launch a counterattack. In the past 6 months, Han Jin had been to a few places, but he had never been as welcomed as he was now. The commander of the city gate actually sent 4 high-ranked warriors to lead the way for Han Jin and his companions. They were very concerned about their well-being. When they found out that Han Jin and his companions did not want to stay in a hotel and wanted to rent a courtyard by themselves, one of the high-ranked warriors ran out. It did not take long for him to contact Han Jin and his companions to find a place to stay. The property of the courtyard was owned by a small businessman. He also wanted to be neighbors with some professionals, so the rent was very cheap. It was only a little more than 1 gold coin a month. Before the warriors left, they tactfully discussed with Han Jin. They hoped that Han Jin and his companions would report to the city hall. If the vampires launched a large-scale attack on the West City, they would resist with the other mercenaries in an organized manner. If there was no organization, it would be very chaotic. Han Jin and his companions agreed to this request without hesitation. They had endured all the way here. They had a deep understanding of the cruelty and violence of the vampires. If the West City was breached, the people would be plunged into misery and suffering. It was only right for them to contribute. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 90. Life became peaceful again. However, everyone was used to the fluctuating between relaxation and nervousness. Their mentality changed very quickly, and they forgot about the hardships of the past few days. They did what they were supposed to do and lived a carefree life. There is also a branch of Morgan and Company in the west side of the city. Logically speaking, Hanjin should have discussed with Sunir, Sassu, and the others how to get in touch with the people of Morgan and Company. However, Hanjin locked himself in his room and told Stillbird to tell everyone that he was going to meditate and would not see anyone for the next few days. After 3 days, Hanjin finally walked out of his room. For Morrison's, who spent every day either practicing swordsmanship or messing around with Sylvia, his appearance meant that his happy days had come to an end. In the room, Sassu had just finished meditating. He was about to light the firewood in the fireplace when he felt a sudden gust of cold wind. He couldn't help but shrink his neck and look back. It was Morrison's who had opened the door from the outside. He was poking his head in to see what he was doing. "Are you coming in or not?" Sassu frowned. Although it was already early spring, it was unusually cold today. He had to continue meditating later, and the temperature in the room had a great impact on him. Sure. Morrison's entered the room in a flash and closed the door behind him. He looked around cautiously before letting out a long breath. Thank God Raphael is not here. Sassu looked at Morrison's with an amused expression. Is Raphael that scary? Morrison's glanced at Sassu and threw the wooden shield in his hand to the ground. He sneered. No, not at all. You can try. I will recommend you to Raphael. Ugh, forget it. Sassu turned his head away and released a small fireball. The firewood in the fireplace emitted a burst of green smoke and burned fiercely. Oomph. Morrison's snorted loudly and sat down by the fireplace. He purposely squeezed Sassu to the side. You. Sassu was almost pushed to the ground. He stood up and was about to say something when he saw the bruises on Morrison's face. He couldn't help but laugh in his heart. After Hanjin finished meditating, he announced that he had found the weakness of Berserk and corrected it. Morrison's could not avoid the fate of being a target. In the team, he was the only one with thick skin. How could he let Hanjin hit Chili? Perhaps he could kill Cherry with just one punch. However, the result was disappointing. Of course, that was true for Morrison's. The others didn't care. They just wanted to watch the show. Hanjin lost control again. Although Hanjin said that Morrison's could block and counterattack, Morrison's could only release his combat aura to protect himself. Occasionally, he would block, but he never counterattacked. In Morrison's words, Hanjin was so delicate that he was afraid that he could poke a hole in Hanjin's body with his finger. The sad thing was that Hanjin was very handsome and young. Morrison's beard had grown out again. He was tall and burly, just like an uncle. If Hanjin punched Hanjin in the face a few times, everyone would laugh and not take it to heart. However, if Morrison's counterattacked and knocked Hanjin down with a few punches, everyone would stand up and denounce him. There was no such thing as fairness in the world. Moxink was well aware of his own limitations in this respect. What was even sadder was that Hanjin became faster and faster after he went berserk. His movements became fiercer and fiercer. He was like a wild beast that had been imprisoned for hundreds of years and finally regained its freedom. Morrison's was determined not to fight back. It was easy to imagine what would happen to him. At this time, the door was pushed open from the outside. Hanjin walked in and was surprised to see the two people in the room. Morrison's, so you're here. Before Morrison's could lament about being caught by this devil, Hanjin said, Sassu, what made you laugh like that? Tell me. Nothing. Sassu smiled. You're here to experiment with Morrison's? Yes. Hanjin nodded. Morrison's looked at Hanjin sadly. Can't you wait until I'm better? Look here and here. Morrison's pointed his thick fingers at his face as he spoke. Hanjin smiled. Really, there won't be a problem this time. Won't. Morrison's eyes widened. You said the same thing last time, right? And the time before that. Can't you ask Sunir for this experiment? She's so close to you. With a creak, the door opened again. Morrison's heart skipped a beat, as if something bad was about to happen. It turned out that a man's intuition could be very accurate sometimes. Morrison's was a good example. Sunir walked in and looked at Morrison's with a half-smile. "What did you just say?" I said. Morrison suddenly thought of an idea. I said that if you're not here, we can't do the experiment. What if Raphael loses control again? "It won't happen this time," Sunir said with a smile. "It won't happen." Morrison's looked suspicious. Hanjin's promise was not trustworthy. He'd been tricked a few times, but Sunir's promise was more convincing. Morrison's hesitated for a while. "You two, you're not colluding with each other to set me up, are you?" "You?" Sunir was furious. Colluding was a terrible word. Morrison's finally realized what he had said. He hurriedly picked up the wooden shield and walked out. "I'm ready. Let's go outside now," he said generously. "Actually, I don't need that anymore." Hanjin pointed at the wooden shield in Morrison's hand. "What?" Morrison's University was shocked. "Are you going to use me as a target?" Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, Hanjin turned into a different person. His eyes were like two unsheathed swords. Morrison's felt as if something was scraping his face. He could see that Hanjin's body was bigger than usual, even through his clothes. His bulging muscles contained a terrifying, explosive power. "It can't be like this," Morrison's lamented in his heart. They hadn't even reached the outside yet. Why did it start already? It didn't matter if he was hit because he had combat energy to protect himself. However, if he broke anything in the house, he would have to pay for it. Even if he didn't break anything, it wouldn't be good if he touched the plants. Morrison's didn't notice that Hanjin's eyes were very clear. It was just that they were covered by the sharpness in his eyes. Hanjin stomped heavily on the ground. His body shot out like an arrow, leaving a trail of afterimages in the air. The bricks he stomped on were instantly smashed into pieces. Morrison's growled and released his combat energy to protect himself. He then placed the wooden shield in front of him. Hanjin's right hand slammed onto the wooden shield. If one could slow down the action, one could clearly see that before Hanjin's hand touched the wooden shield, the pressure between his hand and the wooden shield had already caused Morrison's to stagger backward. In the next moment, Hanjin's hand finally hit the wooden shield. The wooden shield shattered into countless pieces. However, Morrison's didn't feel any impact. The wooden shield was too fragile and shattered too quickly. Morrison's didn't have time to think too much. He yelled, "Sunir, quick, he's out of control again." Surprisingly, there was no flash of white light, nor was there another attack. The house fell into an eerie silence. "You?" Morrison's was stunned. He raised his finger and pointed at Hanjin in disbelief. "You saw it too. Sunir didn't stop me this time. I can control myself," Hanjin said calmly. It's a success." Morrison still couldn't believe it. He stared blankly for a while before bursting into laughter. Hanjin's experiment was a success. The happiest person wasn't Hanjin, but Morrison's. He could finally walk out of his misery. "Don't worry about it now," Sunir asked with a teasing smile in her eyes. It was too early for him to be happy. Morrison sighed. "Raphael, how did you stay conscious?" "It's nothing. Stillberg gave me some inspiration." What inspiration did he give you?" "You won't understand if I explain it to you," Hanjin said awkwardly. He couldn't explain it all. He used Taoist spells, not magic. "Wait," Morrison's finally realized. "Since it's a success, why are you still looking for me? Use your sword and fight me with all your strength. I need to know how powerful I am after going berserk." "Are you kidding?" Morrison suddenly asked seriously. "Kidding?" Hanjin frowned. It was his turn to be confused. "If you want me to do the experiment, I can accompany you. At most, I'll be beaten up by you." Morrison's had a serious expression. "If you want me to draw my sword, you should find someone else. Sylvia and I grew up together, but we've never fought. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because our teacher told us that swords are used to kill, not for fun. Every time you draw your sword, you must have the courage and will to kill your opponent. Otherwise, don't draw your sword." "Didn't you fight Stillberg before?" "How is that the same? Stillberg and I were just playing around." Morrison's shook his head. "With your current speed and strength, do you think I'm qualified to play around with you? Then do your best. Don't worry, I'll be fine." Before coming to find Morrison's, He had already made a talisman for faked Earth corpse. In other words, even if Morrison's accidentally hid his vitals, he would still be fine. You're crazy, but I can't be crazy with you. Morrison's was surprisingly firm and serious. I refuse. Han Jin smiled bitterly. Morrison's was usually easy to talk to, but when he was really stubborn, it was quite frustrating. Han Jin's gaze turned to Sunir. Do you think I can control the arrow I shoot? Sunir rolled her eyes at Han Jin. I refuse as well. Don't look at me. Even a Grand Magus can't take back a spell that has been released. Sasu blocked Morrison's way of talking. Being invincible is the loneliest. Han Jin let out a long sigh. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 91. Life was a balance between work and rest. If they were hiding in the mountains or forests, they would not think so much, but it was different in the city. On this day, Morrison's strongly requested to go out for a walk. Ever since they moved in, Han Jin and Sunir had set a rule that Michelle and Stillberg were in charge of the daily necessities. In other words, apart from them, no one else was allowed to leave the yard. Their only task was to cultivate. Han Jin knew that it was not easy for Morrison's to endure the heavy traffic outside for a few days. After pondering for a while, he felt that it was time for everyone to go out for some fresh air. It would be a problem if they stayed at home all the time. In the end, only Sasu, Chi Li, and Michelle did not want to go out. The others walked out of the yard one after another. Stillberg had the opportunity to go shopping every day, so there was no need for him to follow them. However, it was his instinct. Unless Han Jin said it explicitly, he would always follow Han Jin. The most excited person was Sylvia. Regardless of whether she gave people the impression that she had big breasts but no brains, or that she had long hair but short knowledge, she had a certain level of discipline. Besides, what she had seen and heard in the past few days was more thrilling and exciting than all her previous experiences combined. Even the most arrogant person would subconsciously choose to keep a low profile when they realized that life was not as easy as they thought it would be. Leger, on the other hand, was even more low-key than Sylvia. According to Han Jin's observation, this man did not like to laugh or get angry. When everyone was talking, he would always sit quietly on the side. He was even more ladylike than Chi Li. Morrison's would ask Han Jin to come over when he was free, but Leger never took the initiative to ask. When Han Jin helped him, he would express his gratitude. When Han Jin did not help him, he would remain silent, similar to Sunir. Now, he was wearing the mage cloak that he had borrowed from Sasu. It covered his entire face, and no one could see his face clearly. He walked silently, as if he was floating a bar. Morrison's suddenly yelled. Not only were the people shocked by Morrison's, even the pedestrians on the street were frightened. A few crows that were perched on the trees screamed and flapped their wings to escape into the night sky. Raphael, let's go in and take a seat. Morrison smiled. Most mercenaries could not live without alcohol, and bars were the best places to hire mercenaries, exchange experiences, and gather information. You guys. Sunir laughed. Han Jin raised his head to look at the bar's name. It was Night Rose. He was worried. Let's make this clear first. We'll only drink. Don't cause any trouble. Trouble? Morrison's university laughed. Do you mean other people will come and mess with us? Or do you mean we'll mess with other people? There was a reason why Morrison's was so arrogant. He was a fighter, Sunir was a heart-piercing archer, and Leger who had mastered invisibility. Even the weakest among them was a 7th-grade professional. With Han Jin, who was a master of all kinds of professions, their strength could be considered as outstanding in the mercenary world. Although they were far from being comparable to the Red Vanguards, their combination of professions was perfect. They were good at both close combat and long-range attacks. Normal mercenaries would be asking for trouble if they dare to mess with them. Han Jin was speechless. However, Morrison's was in high spirits, and he did not want to be a wet blanket. They didn't notice, nor could they notice, that the whole West City was covered with crows. When the few crows were scared away by Moxink, the other crows also flew up into the sky and left West City one after another. Maybe they had found what they were looking for and didn't need to stay here any longer. As soon as they opened the door, a wave of noise rushed towards them. A large number of mercenaries had gathered in the west side of the city, and the small bar was almost full. As soon as Han Jin and the others stepped into the bar, they attracted a lot of attention. Usually, people would come to the bar in twos or threes. It was rare for so many people to come to the bar together. The tables in the bar were a little small, so Han Jin and the others had to sit at 2 tables. "Give me a dozen ale," Morrison shouted as soon as his butt touched the chair. "Don't drink too much." For some reason, Sylvia's voice sounded a little gentle. She didn't know what was wrong with Moxink. Logically speaking, he should be happy to be treated like this by Silner. However, instead of responding to Silner's tenderness, Moxink glared at her and said, "It's a man's business. Women should mind their own business." Sylvia was about to explode when she suddenly remembered what Han Jin said. Men usually like gentle women. Sylvia quickly lowered her head and clenched her teeth. She kept encouraging herself in her heart. "Sylvia, you are a lady. You're the most gentle lady in the world." Sylvia finally calmed herself down. She lifted her head and put on a gentle smile. Although the smile looked forced, it was already Sylvia's limit. "It's not good for your body to drink too much," Sylvia said softly. She shivered inwardly and felt goosebumps all over her body. She thought that this should show her concern for Morrison's. Unfortunately, Morrison's did not feel Sylvia's concern for him. He only felt great. Look, the tigress had turned into a lamb. What a sense of accomplishment. To show his manliness, Morrison's picked up a cup of ale and downed it in one gulp. "Nice." Morrison slammed the cup on the table and burped. Sylvia was not happy. "What? Did I say all that for nothing?" Bang! Silner pounded the table heavily, which startled Moxink. "I told you to stop drinking." Sylvia's voice was a little loud. The customers at the table next to them looked over curiously. If it was only the 2 of them, Morrison's might have stopped drinking. However, he could not bring himself to do so in front of so many people. "Do you have the final say, or do I?" Morrison's glared at Sylvia. He picked up another cup of ale and downed it in one gulp. "You have the final say. Of course, you have the final say." Sylvia laughed coldly. Morrison's looked at Sylvia's smile and felt that something was wrong. However, he could not back down now. He braced himself and said, "It's good that you know. Let me tell you, when men are drinking, women should not interrupt." Morrison stared at Sylvia as he spoke. He was afraid that she would say something embarrassing again. To his surprise, Sylvia only glanced at him and turned her head away. Morrison's heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Sylvia's reaction. He was puzzled. Why was Sylvia's temper so good today? But the next moment, Moxink overturned his idea. "Give me a dozen as well." Sylvia yelled as she glanced at Morrison's. Her expression clearly said that she would drink as much as he wanted. Morrison's scalp went numb. He knew the consequences of Sylvia drinking too much. "What are you drinking? Is this appropriate?" "When women are drinking, men should not interrupt," Sylvia said through gritted teeth. Morrison's turned his head to look at Han Jin and the others. He realized that they were all in a heated discussion and no one was paying attention to him. This made Morrison's feel relieved. Otherwise, it would be too embarrassing to be scolded by Sylvia in front of so many people. Morrison's could no longer hold back his anger when he saw the ale being served to Sylvia. It was fine if he lost out in words, but if Sylvia drank too much, he would be the unlucky one. "Sis, don't drink anymore," Morrison said softly. "Why should I? You drink yours, and I'll drink mine. Let's not care about each other." Sylvia was still angry. How could she listen to him? "Sister, I was wrong. Look, I don't want to drink anymore." Moxink forced a smile and pushed the wine glass in front of him to the side. "Oomph." Sylvia harumphed coldly and turned her head away, leaving Morrison's with the back of her head. Morrison's did not dare to say anything. Sylvia could say anything to him, as long as she did not touch the ale on the table. "Sis, I was wrong, okay?" "Ha ha ha." A sarcastic voice suddenly came from the table beside them. Morrison's was furious. He turned around and saw a customer at the table next to them. The customer was holding a seductively dressed woman in his arms. The customer was pointing at them and laughing loudly from time to time. Morrison's was about to rush over and teach the arrogant guy a lesson, but someone was faster than him. A red shadow flashed beside him, and Sylvia was already standing in front of the customer's table. "What are you laughing at?" "I'm talking to you," Sylvia shouted angrily. "What? I can't even laugh? You're being too nosy." The customer did not care about Sylvia at all. He still had a carefree look on his face. Hanjin and Sunir looked at each other. He had already told them to only drink and not cause trouble. They did not expect trouble to happen before they even warmed up their chairs. However, it was the other party who provoked them first. They could not blame Morrison's and Sylvia. Hanjin gave Stillberg a look. Stillberg hurriedly stood up and walked over to Sylvia. "Miss Sylvia, people like him are everywhere. Please don't lower yourself to his level." Seeing Stillberg walk over, Sylvia remembered Hanjin's warning. She harumphed coldly and turned around to leave. However, the customer was not having it. He glared at Stillberg and said angrily, "How can you say that? Say it again and let me hear it." Stillberg was so scared that he took a step back. He said timidly, "I don't know how to speak. I stutter when I see a lot of people. It's like a sheep taking a dump. It's not to your taste. Please forgive me." Hanjin and the others were stunned for a moment. Then they burst into laughter. They had seen people curse others before, but none of them had seen someone curse in such a way. Morrison's even laughed and patted Stillberg's shoulder heavily. He even gave him a thumbs up. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 92. The customer was furious. He pushed the barmaid away and stood up abruptly. The people around them saw that the atmosphere was a little tense. Instead of stopping them, they cheered. "Brother, why are you so agitated?" Morrison said with a smile. He didn't take the guy in front of him seriously. "It was just a fight. Let's fight. I'll buy whoever wins a drink. 5 gold coins on that big guy. Do you dare to bet with me? Do you think we're idiots? That big guy is a fighter. I'll bet on him too." The crowd shouts were getting louder and louder. The customer's expression kept changing, but he didn't dare to fight. A fighter might not be a big deal, but with his companions, the situation was not optimistic. If the other party were all 7th-grade professionals or above, their overall combat power would not be as simple as 1+1. A well-coordinated mercenary team could increase their combat power exponentially. Even the customers on the 2nd floor were alarmed. A short and strong man with a big beard looked down and saw Hanjin. His eyes suddenly flashed with hatred. The hatred was so strong that Hanjin, Sunir, and Leger all felt something and looked around. The short and strong man had already bent down. The lights in the bar were too dim, and there were too many customers. There was also a wide railing on the 2nd floor, so Hanjin and the others didn't notice anything. They just thought it was their own illusion. At this time, the owner of the bar came up with a smile and tried to persuade Morrison's and the customer. Morrison's was not afraid of fighting, but he didn't want to take the initiative to cause trouble. The customer finally had a way out. Finally, he threw a gold coin and strode out without waiting for the change. The bar was filled with booze, and some people were even cursing the boss loudly, blaming him for ruining a good show. However, the boss was also experienced in such situations, so he was not angry. He smiled and said soft words everywhere, and the small disturbance passed just like that. About an hour later, Hanjin and the others walked out of the bar one after another. Morrison's drank happily and even hummed a little tune. In fact, there were many joys in life, and they could be found everywhere. The key was whether one was good at discovering them. It was already very late, and there were almost no pedestrians on the street. Everyone was chatting and laughing as they walked back. Today was no different from usual, at least to them. Just as they turned a corner, Leger suddenly stopped. He said in a low voice, "I'm looking for a friend. You guys go back first." "Friends?" Hanjin was stunned. Leger's words were too sudden. "Do you need us to go with you?" No need, I can do it alone. Han Jin pondered for a moment. Leger probably had something to deal with, but it was his personal matter, and he couldn't pry into it, let alone stop him. Then come back as soon as possible. Don't worry. Leger smiled and quickly walked into an alley. Where did Leger go? Morrison's asked, looking at Leger's back. It should be something important. Han Jin seemed to be in a difficult position. He wanted to bring some people to help Leger, but if Leger found out, it might cause a misunderstanding. If he didn't help, he would be worried. He'll be fine, Sunir said calmly. Leger and Morrison's are two different kinds of people. He's very mature and clear-headed. He knows what he should and shouldn't do. Let's go back and wait for him. What do you mean? Morrison's was angry. His good mood had already dissipated. Two different kinds of people? Then I'm a very frivolous and muddle-headed person? Then I don't let people trust me? What do you think? Sylvia and Sunir were on the same side. To be honest, she thought she had been very gentle today, but she didn't get what she wanted, so she was very disappointed. All right. Let's go back quickly. Don't let Sasu wait too long, Han Jin said with a smile. Morrison's looked at one woman and then the other. He had to admit that he couldn't afford to offend either of them. In the end, he could only grumble and walk away. His good mood was gone. Everyone walked back to their room. The door closed with a burst of laughter and chatter. Everything returned to normal. After a long while, a sneaky person poked his head out from the corner of the street. He looked at the courtyard for a long while before slowly retracting his head back. After memorizing the surrounding scenery, he turned around and was about to walk back when he suddenly stiffened. This was because a cold dagger was pressed against his throat. That cold feeling seeped into the depths of his soul. You've already followed me here. Why do you still want to leave? A figure hidden in a cloak said calmly. The person was stunned. He immediately recognized that the person in front of him was one of the targets. He thought that the person in front of him had something urgent to do and left. He didn't expect that the person in front of him would be here. He was shocked and scared, but since things had already come to this point, he could only pretend to be confused. My lord, what are you doing? I only have these on me. Please do me a favor and don't hurt me. He slowly reached into his pocket and took out a money pouch. Do you know what a low-level thief's biggest taboo is? Leger didn't even look at the money pouch. It's tailing a high-level thief. You'll die a horrible death if you do that. My lord, I don't understand what you mean. You don't need to understand. Turn around and walk forward, Leger said slowly. My lord. The person smiled. His neck suddenly turned to the side, and a dagger appeared in his hand. He stabbed it towards Leger's heart. Leger swung his arm, and a cold light flashed. The person felt his vision blur, and then he found that his right wrist was firmly grabbed. The person's body wasn't big, but his strength was surprisingly strong. The person felt that his wrist was about to be crushed, and he had no choice but to let go of his dagger. Don't you remember what I said just now? You'll die a horrible death, Leger said with a mocking smile. The man suddenly felt some kind of liquid flowing down his cheek. He wiped it with his hand and found that his hand was covered in blood and some kind of unknown liquid. Then he found that he couldn't see anything in one of his eyes, but he still couldn't feel any pain. This strange contrast made him want to go crazy. Just as he was about to scream, the cold dagger returned to his neck. Then he heard a voice even colder than the dagger. You have one more chance to disobey my order. Believe me, if you know what the price is, you will regret it. The person opened his only eye and looked at Leger with fear. After a while, he finally turned around and walked towards the courtyard. Leger knocked on the courtyard door a few times. He heard two people walking towards the courtyard door, and then he heard Sunir's low voice. There's the smell of blood. It's me. Leger spoke first so that Sunir wouldn't suddenly jump out and shoot him with an arrow. The door opened quickly. Sunir opened the door and saw the one-eyed man. She couldn't help but be surprised. She moved aside and let Leger in with the captive. What happened? This guy's been following us, Leger said in a low voice. You guys go in first, Sunir said as she closed the door. Chili walked out from behind the tree and nervously looked at the one-eyed man. Leger continued to walk inside with the one-eyed man. Sunir quietly went behind the big tree at the foot of the courtyard. She jumped and silently slipped into the branches and leaves, carefully observing her surroundings. Han-Jin, Morrison's, and the others in the room were also shocked. "What's going on?" Han-Jin asked as he looked at the miserable one-eyed man. "This guy has been following us. You said you had something to do to catch him?" Han-Jin asked. "Yes." Leger nodded. "At that time, I know. You did the right thing." Han-Jin reached out and patted Leger's shoulder. Stillberg, Sylvia, and little Joseph were all there. If Leger had said that someone was following them, some of them would have looked around, and the result would have been different. "Damn it! How dare you follow us?" Morrison's cursed. He was a soft-hearted person. When he saw the one-eyed man's face covered in blood, he didn't want to do anything. Otherwise, he would have beaten him up. "Sir, I will die," the one-eyed man said with a trembling voice. Although he tried his best to close his injured eye, he couldn't stop the blood from flowing out. In this short period of time, the soft armor in front of his chest was stained red and half of his pants were wet. "You don't want to die? If you don't want to die, then tell us the truth." "Who asked you to follow us?" Han-Jin said softly. He was very satisfied with Leger in other aspects, but he was a little too cruel. He shouldn't have used such an irreversible method to follow them. Sunir said that Leger was a calm and clear-headed person. This evaluation was a little too much. There was no problem with him being clear-headed. No one noticed that someone was following them except for Leger. However, such an intense method couldn't be considered calm. "He wants to kill me," Leger suddenly added. Perhaps he saw through Han-Jin's feelings. Oh, Han-Jin's expression turned cold. If it was just following them, it wouldn't be a big deal. Maybe it was just out of curiosity. However, if he wanted to hurt Leger, then it was a serious matter. It's a blacksmith under General Jason who hired me to follow you." The one-eyed man answered quickly. He then begged, "Sir, please let me go. I don't want to die like this." "General Jason?" "Jason is the commander of the West City's cavalry. He has a lot of power." Leger looked coldly at the one-eyed man. "Are you lying?" "Sir, I'm about to die. Why would I lie?" The one-eyed man said with a trembling voice. "Please let me go, sir." Chapter 93. General Jason? I don't think we've ever offended this person. Han-Jin glanced around. "Do you know him?" "I've only heard of his name." Leger said. "Forging master?" Keeley suddenly stood up and asked in a stern voice, "Is that forging master called Viller?" "Miss, are you familiar with Mr. Viller?" The one-eyed man said with a trembling voice. At this moment, his body began to sway slightly. It was obvious that his spirit was close to collapse. "Familiar? Of course." Keeley gnashed her teeth and said, "I'll never forget him." If Viller had just absconded, Keeley would never have hated him so much. But Viller killed people first and then escaped. Her nature had completely changed. When did Viller become an adult? Han-Jin shook his head. The one-eyed man still wanted to explain, but suddenly he felt darkness in front of his eyes, and his body fell down softly. "Do you know that Viller?" Leger asked. "You'll know when you see Keeley," Han-Jin said softly. "Now I'm wondering, it seems that we don't owe Viller anything. Where did he get the courage and reason to trouble us?" "There are all kinds of people in this world." Morrison said angrily. "We should have killed Viller at that time." "Since you said so." Leger paused. "Then he can't be kept alive." Leger kicked the one-eyed man. At this moment, Sunir came in from the outside. Han-Jin asked, "Where have you been?" "I waited outside to see if anyone else followed us." Sunir glanced at everyone's face. "What's going on?" "We used to have an enemy." Han-Jin described the experience in detail, and finally added, "Viller should have escaped directly to the West City, and then met General Jason. It seems he should be very important here." "Is Viller's forging level very high?" Sunir frowned and asked. "Yes." Keeley nodded. "That's understandable. Such a forging master will be valued, no matter where he goes." Sunir sighed. "My suggestion is we should leave the West City and go to the Ninth Town. My friend is there, and he will protect us. I remember we talked about this issue before." Aren't you worried about bringing trouble to your friend? Han Jin said. But do we have any other choice? Leger smiled bitterly. You're my friend, too. I think he'll be very happy to meet you. What's your friend's name? Is he very powerful? Sunir asked. My friend is Ronning. He's a Grand Knight and the captain of the Riptide Regiment's 1st Cavalry. Riptide? Lang Ning? Sunir was surprised. Riptide headquartered in Bite City? Morrison's also showed a surprised look. Is there any other Riptide in Bite Man? Leger smiled. As the commander of Riptide, I believe he can protect us. Sunir pondered. But how do you know him? Are you close friends? He and I are playmates who grew up together. How is that possible? Sunir said in a doubtful tone, when I was in Wild Willow City, I read the information about Riptide. Lang Ning is the most dazzling new star of Riptide. This person is tenacious and has strong military accomplishments. He was appreciated by the former commander of Riptide, Conrad. He publicly said that Langni was his ideal successor. What's more, Langni is the son of the former deputy commander of Riptide, Benedict. You're his playmate? Is there a problem? Leger asked. You're Leger? An idea flashed through Sunir's mind. She suddenly remembered an inconspicuous introduction she had read that day. You are the son of Captain Conrad? The guy who didn't do his job and caused trouble since childhood? Miss Sunir, I'm not that bad. Leger didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You're really Conrad's son? Sassu asked. Judging from his expression, he should have heard of Conrad's name. You can lie about this? Leger asked. Then I don't understand. You're Conrad's son. Why would they dare to do anything to you? Sunir asked. My father passed away a few years ago, and you don't understand. If I don't understand, then no one here can. You? Leger was stunned. He felt that Sunir was a bit too arrogant. 20 years ago, Sunir participated in a war. You should know about the Silver Pegasus Legion, right? Sassu smiled. Leger joined later, so he didn't know about Sunir's past. Sunir wouldn't talk about her past glory, so he had to repeat it. It was during that war that Sunir became the true commander. In the end, she led the elves back to Wild Willow City safely. This time, it was Reg's turn to be moved. The surprise attack launched by the Silver Pegasus Legion and the Elven Archers had become a model in military history. For more than a year, the Silver Pegasus Legion had traveled day and night, raiding everywhere, and slowly wrapping the noose around Lord Cass's neck. Zagund wasn't the only one who studied and learned from that battle. His father, the commander of the Legion of Conrad, also had a very high evaluation of that surprise attack. I didn't think that there would be an elven hero here. Leger sighed. All right, let's talk about you. Why did they dare to attack you? Sunir said slowly. She didn't mean to pry into other people's secrets. Even the slightest change in the structure of the upper echelons would have a profound impact on the lower echelons. It could even change the relationship between the lords, policies, and so on. The 4 city lords all want the right to command Riptide. When my father was here, they didn't dare to act recklessly. Now, no one could stop them. Leger smiled bitterly. When my father passed away, he gave an order for Lang Ning to be the commander of Riptide. In the end, they rejected it because he was too young and didn't have enough experience. Then who is the commander now? No one. Leger shook his head. They all want their own people to be the commander. In the end, no one has the upper hand. Leger, then why didn't you become a warrior? Why did you become a thief instead? Sassu asked slowly. In fact, he wasn't asking about his profession, but about his status and identity. In this world, it was natural for a son to inherit his father's business. Although Riptide wasn't anyone's private property, the situation was a little special. The 4 city lords couldn't suppress each other. Riptide wasn't controlled by the city lords. If the commander of the Legion of Conrad wanted to support Leger, the other city lords could only watch. Otherwise, the soldiers of Riptide wouldn't agree. However, it wasn't so easy to support an illegitimate person. Would the generals be convinced? They would even think that they were more suitable than Lang Ning. The commander of the Legion of Conrad chose someone else's child in the end. Things had become like this, so it must have something to do with Leger. Because my father's life was too tiring. I don't want to be like him. Leger didn't want to talk about these things. His tone was very slow, and there was something flashing in his eyes, scheming against the other city lords, worrying about the logistics of the army, ensuring the training, and when the Bite Man was invaded, Riptide had to be the first to attack. It was too difficult to do all these things well. My father wasn't even 40 years old, but his hair was already gray. He was a high-ranked light knight, a 10th grade professional, but he was defeated by illness in his 40s. Don't you think this is a big joke? At the end, Leger smiled bitterly. Obviously, he had been brooding over his father's premature death. No one can deny that the commander of the Legion of Conrad was a noble and righteous knight, Sunir said slowly. Noble? Righteous? Ha! Leger suddenly became excited, but he immediately realized that something was wrong. He took a deep breath and controlled his emotions. He wanted to say that if he didn't see with his own eyes how his father's noble and righteous actions were rewarded, he wouldn't be willing to take another path. But it was meaningless to say these words. He didn't expect to be understood by anyone, and he was more worried about causing unnecessary misunderstandings. Therefore, he didn't say anything. Well, let's talk about ourselves. Han Jin saw that Leger's mood was not right, so he quickly changed the topic. Sunir, what do you think? Then let's go to Ninth Town. I've always been curious about this Lang Ning. I can guarantee that you won't be disappointed. Leger said softly, I'll deal with this guy first, and then we'll get ready. We'll leave the west side of the city in 2 or 3 days. Leave again? Damn it. When can we settle down? Morrison shouted. You can't stand it anymore? Sunir laughed. Stop. Sunir, I can't compare with you. Morrison's shook his head. Leger bent down and carried the one-eyed man on his shoulder. Then he slowly walked out of the room. Han Jin looked at Leger's back and said slowly, At that time, I felt that Leger's family was not ordinary. I didn't expect that he had such an illustrious father. I've seen the evaluation of Leger in the intelligence reports. It was very bad. I felt sorry for Captain Conrad of the Legion of Conrad. But now it seems that the information may not be true. Sunir laughed. Maybe he did it on purpose to disappoint others? Or is there some other reason? I don't understand. Sylvia asked curiously. Did his father want him to be an official, but he didn't want to, so he deliberately did bad things to disappoint others? Something like that. Han Jin said softly. He's not a good man. Sylvia curled her lips. A man shouldn't disappoint his family. What do you know? Morrison shouted. Leger was at the door. Sylvia's words would hurt his feelings. Sylvia was about to retort, but she was discouraged. She wanted to show her ladylike side. However, her gentleness was often based on her arched eyebrows, which was a bit strange. Leger's face suddenly turned pale, but he didn't say anything. He just turned around and disappeared in front of the door. Chapter 94. The atmosphere in the west side of the city suddenly became tense. Michel went out to buy wheat flour and prepare to make some bread for the journey. When he returned, he brought back a very bad news. There were soldiers everywhere on the streets, strictly checking the pedestrians. It was only a 10-minute walk from the market to the courtyard, but Michel had already been checked several times. Fortunately, Michel looked very honest, and he was carrying a small bag of wheat flour. He did not look like a bad guy, so they did not give him a hard time. Han Jin hurriedly asked Michel to walk around the city gate. This time, the news Michel brought back was even more nerve-wracking. In the past, people who came in were strictly checked, and those who left were almost ignored. Now, the situation was reversed. Sunir, Morrison's, and the others sat together and discussed for a long time. Sunir had been in the army before, so she was very decisive. Han Jin was also not a person who liked to dawdle. The two of them decided that since they had decided to leave, the sooner the better. In fact, there was not much to pack. In the afternoon, everyone walked out of the courtyard one after another. However, they were divided into 2 groups. Han Jin and Morrison's walked in front, while the others followed behind. They kept a distance of about 100 meters from Han Jin. Morrison's physical characteristics were too obvious. If something really happened, it would be Morrison's who was discovered. Sunir, Sassu, and Leger tried their best not to participate in the battle. Their mission was to protect the non-combatants, such as Chi, Li, and Stillberg. The two groups of people silently walked through the pedestrians. After passing several streets, nothing happened. After turning the corner and walking for a few hundred meters, they would reach the city gate. At this time, a team of knight suddenly turned the corner and came over. Han Jin was right. With Morrison's body and temperament, he would attract attention like a crane in a flock of chickens. A knight looked at Morrison's in the crowd and frowned. Then he saw Han Jin hiding beside Morrison's. His eyes suddenly brightened. Before he even had time to greet his companions, he roared, "You two stop!" The pedestrians on the street were all stunned. Han Jin looked up and was shocked. He knew the knight. When they were escorting the caravan to the Holy Crown City, there was a serious conflict between them. Han Jin and the middle-aged knight confronted each other for a long time. In the end, he killed the hostage and escaped with the Earthmeld charm. How did they come to the west city of the Bite Man? Han Jin was puzzled. "Catch them!" The middle-aged knight roared. "Lord Dismark ordered us to capture them alive. We will reward them handsomely." The knights on the opposite side were looking at the middle-aged knight with blame. They came here to talk about cooperation, not to make trouble. Besides, the middle-aged knight was a general who had been demoted, so they didn't think highly of him. However, these words immediately made them excited. Lord Dismark had personally promised a great reward, and it definitely wouldn't be an ordinary reward. The knights shouted in unison, drew their swords, and rushed towards them. The pedestrians on the street were in a mess, running in all directions. Sunir and Leger didn't try to join the fight according to their original agreement. Instead, they led the rest of the knights to retreat. They mixed in the chaotic crowd and didn't attract the attention of the knights. "Let's go," Han Jin roared. His fingers moved like a butterfly, and 3 fire talismans flew out in 3 different directions. "I'm going." Morrison's was stunned. He originally wanted to charge forward with his sword. The ones who charged at the front were warriors, and the ones who fought to the death were also warriors. Warriors were known to have short lives. 2 of the fire talismans that Han Jin shot out had already been shattered by the knights, but the fire talismans still exploded. The rapidly expanding flames and huge shockwaves temporarily stopped the knights from charging forward. One of the fire talismans hit the target, and the horse was turned into a headless corpse. The fire talisman shattered the horse's head in an instant. The knight on the horse couldn't help but fly off the horse's back. He passed through the flames and fell to the ground in a sorry state. "Don't talk nonsense. Let's go." Han Jin finally understood the true meaning of that saying. Cut the weeds and remove the roots. It was definitely not a good thing to let one's enemies roam freely in the world. One could encounter them at any time, and they could bring unexpected harm to oneself. Morrison suddenly turned around and rushed straight toward an alley. There was a reason why they decided to leave in the morning and leave in the afternoon. With the addition of Leger, they didn't have to do things the same way as before. First, they had to decide which gate to go through. After that, Michel ran around for half a day and memorized all the streets and alleys they would pass through. Then, he came up with a contingency plan, how to deal with any situation that might arise, and the meeting point of the worst-case scenario. Everyone knew this by heart, so even young Joseph and Stillberg didn't panic at all. As a matter of fact, Han Jin used to be a private detective. He knew the importance of planning, but there were too many things he didn't know about this world. Sunir used to be a commander, so she paid more attention to planning than Han Jin. However, this was not an army, and Han Jin and the others were not soldiers. Their goal was to find a quiet place, not to fight. Everything had to be planned. It was better not to make a fuss over nothing. Besides, most of the dangers they encountered were sudden and had nothing to do with planning. The addition of Leger had fundamentally changed the way the team did things. Because of his resolute attitude, everyone had to sit down and patiently discuss the various possibilities. Only Morrison's was a little impatient. In his words, even if they discussed for a month, they still had to rely on their own swords to break through. However, everyone agreed with Leger's suggestion. He was a little weak by himself, so he could only reluctantly sit down and listen carefully. "It's a sorcerer! Charge! Charge!" The knight shouted and quickly divided into two teams. One team attracted Hanjin's attention from the front, while the other team circled around from the side. "Don't give him a chance, quick!" The middle-aged knight rushed to the front with bloodshot eyes. He was the only one who had interacted with Hanjin before, and knew that Hanjin had mastered a very strange magic. As for the other knight, they were confused and didn't want to give him a chance. Hanjin sneered and waved his arm. 3 more fire talismans shot out and hit 3 knight. The middle-aged knight didn't slow down at all. He waved his sword like he was driving away flies, and the fire talismans were smashed into pieces. However, the warhorse he was riding on let out a miserable neigh. Knights had the protection of combat energy, but warhorses didn't, so they were the most vulnerable to injuries. "Die!" The middle-aged knight raised his sword and swung it at Hanjin with all his might. The sword flashed, and before it even reached Hanjin, he felt a bone-chilling coldness. His pupils suddenly shrank, and his body moved at the same time, retreating at an extremely fast speed. The sword light sprinkled on the ground, and visible frost spread in all directions. After using the art of spirit possession, Hanjin's strength, speed, and eyesight had all been greatly improved. He could even clearly see a few flying insects suddenly stiffen and fall straight to the ground. Hanjin retreated quickly, but the middle-aged knight was even faster. His legs were tightly clamped around the warhorse's waist. Perhaps because he was using too much strength, the warhorse under him neighed and rushed forward crazily. Another sword flashed. Hanjin didn't know the power of combat energy, so he didn't dare to take the risk. His body swayed to the left, and he slammed open the door of a house and rushed in. Of course, the middle-aged knight wouldn't give up. He urged his warhorse to follow him into the courtyard. But at the moment when he was about to rush in, Hanjin's figure suddenly rose from the wall and rushed toward the knights behind him. He didn't release the 6 fire talismans in vain. He had clearly estimated the strength of those knights. Except for his old enemy, the other knights were at most 3rd or 4th level warriors. It wasn't surprising. If Desmart's cavalry were all 6th or 7th level professionals, he would have been able to sweep the continent long ago. Facing the cold sword flashing, Hanjin was not afraid. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and his body floated up like a swallow to meet the sword flashing. In the opposite knight's astonished eyes, a tall wooden figure suddenly appeared and blocked the sword flashing with its own body. The next moment, Hanjin's fist passed through the wooden figure's shoulder and heavily hit the knight's face. The knight's body continued to rush forward, but his head suddenly tilted back until it was twisted to an incomprehensible degree. Finally, he fell from the horse to the ground. The wooden figure didn't stop for a moment. It jumped up again and opened its arms to hug the next knight. The knight had seen the way his companion died. He was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He desperately waved his sword a hack at the wooden figure. Once, twice, thrice. The speed of his sword was quite fast. When the wooden golem charged into his attack range, he slashed 3 times in a row, leaving 3 deep wounds on the wooden golem's body. However, those were just wounds. The wooden golem stretched out its right arm, grabbed him, and pulled him down from the horse's back. "Save me!" The knight screamed, and then he felt a chill under his ribs. Hanjin had appeared beside him without him knowing, and had just plunged the sword he had just snatched deep into his body. "Bastard!" With an angry shout, a knight's spear pierced from Hanjin's right side like a poisonous dragon, aiming straight for Hanjin's neck. Choosing this position proved that the knight was very confident, but he couldn't understand how terrifying Hanjin's fighting strength had become after Berserk. Hanjin stepped back, and the knight's spear pierced past his body. He stretched out his hands, grabbed the knight's spear, and knelt down at the same time. In a deafening roar, Hanjin had lifted the knight up. The knight spun half a circle in the air and crashed to the ground with a bang. Although he was protected by his Do Chi, he couldn't withstand such a violent impact. He spat out a big mouthful of blood. Before he could get up, Han Jin had jumped to his side and punched him. Boom, 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 3 consecutive punches. The knight's helmet was smashed out of shape. His legs trembled, and he stopped moving. The rest of the night were stunned. Magician? Puppeteer? Barbarian? To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 96. With a roar, the middle-aged knight rushed out of the courtyard. He had abandoned his horse and was charging Han Jin with only his sword. Han Jin flicked his hand and released a thunder charm. Then, he moved his body and retreated. Most of the lightning spells released by magicians were distorted, but the thunder charm released by Han Jin fell straight down from the sky and hit the middle-aged knight. With a boom, the middle-aged knight's body suddenly became stiff. Han Jin's heart skipped a beat, and his body suddenly floated forward. His original intention was to avoid the attack and kill the other knights first. He didn't expect that the paralyzing effect of lightning spells could be reflected in the thunder charm. Naturally, he had to change his mind. Han Jin was only 7 or 8 meters away from the middle-aged knight. In the blink of an eye, he had closed in on the middle-aged knight. He stretched out his left hand and slapped at the middle-aged knight. At this moment, the middle-aged knight's mouth suddenly curled into a sneer. His sword flashed and stabbed directly at Han Jin's heart. Han Jin was shocked and realized that he had fallen into a trap. He flipped his right hand, and a wooden giant appeared between them out of thin air. Han Jin's left hand changed its direction and slapped on the back of the wooden giant, taking advantage of its strength to retreat rapidly. The middle-aged knight shouted in a low voice. His sword flashed brightly, and the wooden puppet was sent flying backward as soon as it collided with the sword. Han Jin retreated as fast as he could, but the middle-aged knight chased after him. The sword flashed a few meters in front of Han Jin, and the bone-chilling cold current rushed toward Han Jin wave after wave. Han Jin's eyebrows and hair were covered with a layer of white frost, and his speed became slower and slower. However, Han Jin didn't want to run away at this moment because he had decided that from now on, he must eliminate the source of trouble so as to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. Therefore, he had killed 3 knights in a row, and this middle-aged man in front of him must die. Han Jin threw out another talisman, and 5 ghosts appeared out of thin air. They didn't need to attack because the middle-aged man was too fast and directly crashed into him. The 5 ghosts screamed and surrounded the middle-aged knight. Han Jin threw out another fire charm and aimed at the middle-aged knight's lower body. Then he jumped up and pounced on the middle-aged knight's chest. Get lost! The middle-aged knight roared, and his chi started to vibrate at an extremely fast speed. The 5 ghosts were all bounced back. The middle-aged knight waved his long sword and shattered the fire charm that Han Jin had shot out. Then he suddenly rushed through the flames and chopped down at Han Jin's chest with his sword. The dazzling light of the sword suddenly bloomed. Han Jin didn't know what words to use to describe the sword flashing. Even with his eyesight enhanced by the spirit possession technique, he still had to squint his eyes. Now he couldn't retreat or dodge, so he could only release a wooden talisman to block in front of him. After a loud noise, the wooden talisman instantly turned into countless fragments and splashed in all directions. The remaining sword flashed through the fragments and hit Han Jin's chest. His robe was forcibly torn apart and blood burst out. Han Jin's chest had a deep wound about half a foot long. If it was a little deeper, his stomach would have been cut open. His body flew out involuntarily as if it was hit by a bull and hit a courtyard wall. Han Jin couldn't hold it in any longer. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. The middle-aged knight had forgotten to capture Han Jin alive. His figure rushed up, and another sword flash swept towards Han Jin. The heavy injury made Han Jin sober. There was always a gap between reality and ideals. Before, he was just relying on tricks. If he wanted to kill a 7th or 8th-step professional in a face-to-face battle, his current ability was far from enough. Han Jin looked coldly at the middle-aged knight. His figure suddenly sank down and disappeared into the ground. The middle-aged knight was stunned for a moment, then became crazy. He rushed up and waved his long sword, slashing randomly on the ground while shouting madly. He thought that Han Jin was able to escape so easily last time because he was careless and gave Han Jin a chance to chant a spell. Therefore, this time he did his best to entangle and attack Han Jin, but he didn't expect that Han Jin could still escape. Asterisk, 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 while the middle-aged knight was going crazy, Sunir, Sisu, and the others had already hidden in a very ordinary house. This house was bought by Michel during the day. In Leger's words, a dozen gold coins was not a big deal. If an accident really happened, this house would become their life-saving shelter. Now, Leger's words had been proven correct. The sound of hooves could be heard, and a carriage stopped at the gate of the courtyard. Morrison's got out of the carriage, and Michel also jumped down from the coachman's seat. They walked into the courtyard one after another. After a moment, the horse pulling the carriage suddenly neighed as if it was frightened and rushed forward. The gate of the courtyard silently opened by itself, and then closed by itself. Leger's figure gradually appeared in the courtyard. He carefully waited for a moment, and then walked into the room inside. "Where's Raphael?" Sunir asked. "He's blocking the night." Morrison sat down on a chair. "You're letting him block the night alone?" Sasu shouted. "What can I do?" Morrison's was already feeling uncomfortable. He suddenly stood up. "He must have let me go. Under such circumstances, do you think I should argue with him about who should stay and who should go?" "Keep your voice down," Sunir shouted in a low voice. "Do you want others to notice us? Do you want me to go out and look for him?" Leger said slowly. At this moment, a figure suddenly emerged from the ground in the middle of the room. Sunir and the others were startled. Morrison's instinctively pulled out his greatsword, and Leger activated invisibility at the same time. In the next moment, they saw that the person was Han Jin. Han Jin staggered. He was badly injured, but who could he blame? He wanted to kill his opponent too much, and he had underestimated him too much. "Raphael, you're bleeding so much." Sunir held Han Jin and cried out in surprise. "It's fine. Have you forgotten who I am?" Han Jin smiled. He quickly cast a spell and placed a talisman on his wound. Soon, the blood was stopped by an unknown force. "How did this happen?" Morrison's and the others all gathered around Han Jin, looking at him with concern. It would be an exaggeration to say that Han Jin was their leader because everyone in the team was equal for the time being. However, Han Jin was their spiritual sustenance. As long as Han Jin was there, they would have hope. One day, they would be able to stand at the top of the pyramid. "That guy is hard to deal with." Han Jin sighed. "His fighting technique is very strange. It seems to be able to freeze everything around him. My body was greatly affected, and I didn't even dare to breathe. Every time I breathed, I felt as if my throat was being pricked by needles." "Don't talk so much. Sit down first." Sunir pulled a chair over and helped Han Jin sit down. Morrison's was stunned. "What's so strange about it?" "That's the ice fighting technique. It's one of the 5 great inheritances, along with the galaxy fighting technique, thunderblast fighting technique, dragon flame fighting technique, and earth fighting technique." "Ah," Han Jin sighed in his heart. Why did he say the wrong thing again? "Are you really okay?" Leger asked softly. In fact, Leger was not a person who liked to talk nonsense, but he needed to be sure. "I'm really okay. Don't worry." Han Jin hesitated for a moment. It seems the situation isn't optimistic. "Sylvia, take them outside. We have some things to discuss." "Okay." Sylvia nodded, and then led Michel and the others out. "I wanted to save it for a critical moment." Han Jin smiled bitterly. "Morrison's, come here." Morrison's University walked over. "What's wrong?" Han Jin took out a talisman and solemnly placed it on Morrison's chest. Then, he reached out his right hand and continuously drew on Morrison's chest. In the past, Han Jin could release talismans very quickly, but this time, it took him more than 10 minutes. Perhaps it was because he had lost too much blood, but his face was getting paler and paler. Sunir and the others tried to stop Han Jin a few times, but they were worried that it would cause harm to Han Jin so they could only watch from the side. After a long time, Hanjin finally let out a sigh of relief. He waved his hand and shouted, "Go!" The talisman emitted a white light and then disappeared into Morrison's chest. "Morrison's, how do you feel now?" Hanjin asked. "It's very strange." Morrison's scratched his head. "It's like there are two of me." "That's right. I was worried that it wouldn't work." Hanjin laughed. "Raphael, what does this spell do?" Sunir was curious. "I've given him another life." "What? What do you mean?" Morrison's was confused. "It means that when you receive a fatal attack, this spell will take your place." "What about me?" "Nonsense." Hanjin couldn't help but roll his eyes. "Of course you'll still be alive." Sunir, Sasu, and the others all sucked in a breath of cold air. The room suddenly became eerily quiet. Even the sound of a needle dropping on the ground could be heard clearly. Those who walked on the edge of danger knew the meaning of this spell all too well. If Hanjin could cast this spell once, then he could do it a second time. Didn't that mean that those who received Hanjin's protection would have an immortal body? The priest's forbidden spell, Great Sacrifice, had a similar effect. However, it was a spell that sacrificed oneself to save others. It was incomparable to Hanjin's spell. "Raphael, can you guarantee the effect of this spell?" Sunir asked with a trembling voice. "I was killed by a female thief once, but I'm still alive," Hanjin said calmly. "Morrison's, stand still," Sunir suddenly said after a moment of silence. She took out her longbow and aimed an arrow at Morrison's. Hey, what are you doing?" Morrison's jumped up. "Sunir, why are you messing around?" Hanjin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Do you think this kind of spell can be cast easily?" Yes. Morrison's nodded vigorously. He was actually very curious about this spell, but he didn't want to test it with his life. "Why didn't you use this spell when you were injured?" Leger suddenly asked. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 97. Because I don't want to, the materials needed to cast this spell are too precious. Hanjin said, "Also, I overestimated the effect of the Berserk spell and underestimated the guy's attack power." "What materials do you need?" Sunir and the others asked in unison. Compared to the powerful effect of the spell, the value of the materials was negligible. They also understood why Hanjin sent the others outside. If this news spread out, it would bring about unimaginable consequences for the whole team. Those high and mighty lords would definitely treat Hanjin as a treasure and target them at all costs in order to control Hanjin. Who wouldn't want to have another life? It's very troublesome. Hanjin could only use this as an excuse. If it's troublesome, then we'll talk about it later. Sunir paused. "Oh, right, you just came out from the ground. What kind of spell was that?" "It's a nameless spell. I only know how to cast it." Hanjin had a headache. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind, and his body swayed along with it. He looked exhausted. "Don't ask anymore. Let Raphael rest," Leger said. "Morrison's, don't think that you could do whatever you want just because you have another life." Hanjin looked at Morrison's and said slowly, "I'll repeat it again. The materials needed for this spell are very precious, and the failure rate is very high." "I know," Morrison's replied in a low, muffled voice. "Do you think I'm stupid? You're so heavily injured, but you're not willing to cast the spell. Do you think I'll mess around?" "I'm relieved to hear that." Hanjin let out a sigh of relief. With his current speed of absorbing magic crystals, it would take him 7 or 8 days to accumulate enough earth element to make an earth escape charm. If he wanted to make the faked earth corpse charm, it would take him at least 2 months. He only had 1 faked earth corpse charm. After giving it to Morrison's, he wouldn't even have one for himself. If Morrison's didn't cherish it, he would go crazy on the spot. Sunir blushed a little. She was only thinking about the miraculous effects of magic and wanted to verify it, but she had neglected a fact. If Hanjin could cast this kind of magic at will, how could he be injured? After a few more days, I'll make a magic scroll for Leger. That way, we'll be much safer, Han Jin said softly. I don't need it. You can keep it to protect yourself. Leger hurriedly shook his head. I have stealth. I've already thought about it. Han Jin said softly. After you activate stealth, if you want to kill a high-grade professional at all costs, you should have a good chance, right? Leger hesitated for a moment. You mean a magic scroll in exchange for the life of a high-grade professional? Yes. As long as it's not a 9th-grade master, I'm 100% sure. What about a 10th-grade master? Morrison's was in the mood to argue again. That's good. Han Jin ignored Morrison's. At the critical moment, we can kill the enemy's leader in one fell swoop. That way, our chances will be much higher. Then my role is to attract everyone's attacks. Anyway, I have 2 lives. Moxon grinned. I don't know if it will be very painful. That's it, Sunir said. There's only one bed in here. Raphael, you go rest. I'll let Michelle and little Joseph go out and ask about the situation. We'll decide what to do tomorrow. Don't you want to try at night? Morrison's asked. I think the security will be even tighter at night. Sunir shook her head. And there are almost no pedestrians at night. If we're discovered, we won't be able to escape even if we want to. Yes, we can only leave during the day. Han Jin agreed with Sunir's opinion. I'm a little tired. You can arrange the rest as you see fit. Asterisk, 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 after comforting the wailing Steelberg, Han Jin hid inside and began to treat his injuries with charms. It was reasonable to say that after using the art of spirit possession, one's body would become extremely tough. The so-called invulnerable rumor had its origin and basis. However, the reality gave him a loud slap in the face. With his current energy, he was still not strong enough to compete with high-grade professionals. Talismans were applied, and the wounds were slowly healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then Han Jin slowly closed his eyes and blessed himself with a spirit refreshment spell. He slowly adjusted his breathing. When the dark sky covered the West City, Han Jin came out of the room inside and saw Sunir and others sitting together. Their expressions were very strange. Intuitively, Han Jin knew something was wrong. He hurriedly asked, "What's wrong?" "Raphael, do you know why the whole city is under martial law today?" Sunir smiled bitterly. "Isn't it because you think it's because of the disappearance of that little thief? Do you think a dwarf forging grandmaster can be so bold?" The bitter smile on Sunir's face became thicker. "I suspected it at that time." "Who is Viller?" Morrison's cried. "Then why didn't you say it at that time?" Leger asked. I just felt something was wrong, but I don't know what it is." "What's going on?" "Last night, Dismark sent his most trusted general, Gerald, to the West City to negotiate with Winston, the mayor of the West City. As a result, he was attacked by a group of dark elves. Gerald was killed on the spot. Han Jin was stunned for a long time, and then he smiled bitterly. "So, we were too impulsive." "It's too late to say this," Sunir sighed. "You and Morrison's are wanted. I suspected it at that time. Is Viller really that powerful?" Morrison's was still muttering. "You still say it? If you didn't go to the bar to drink, will we be found by Viller?" Sunir said angrily. "Hey, how can you blame me? Didn't you drink?" Okay, let's not talk about this." Han Jin paused. Sunir, that is to say, in order to give an explanation to Dismark, the mayor of the West City must try to find those dark elves. This means that we are also in danger, right? If they can catch us, it can be considered as an explanation, especially you. It is said that Lord Dismark personally ordered to catch you alive. Sunir sighed again. "Raphael, tell us honestly, what did you do when you left us?" "Nothing." Han Jin frowned and thought for a while. "By the way, do you remember the hostage?" "Yes. When I left, I killed him." Han Jin suddenly remembered something. "That guy was called Mario." "Mario? I don't remember." Sunir stared at Han Jin. "And then? You were missing for so long, and you only killed Mario? Remember that merchant? Leopold, they were all killed by me." "Them? You mean the whole caravan?" "You?" Sunir smiled bitterly. "But this is not the reason to make Dismark angry. Is there anything else?" Han Jin blinked. "There's a General Quincy. I trapped him in the underground city. If people in the Holy Crown City can't find him, he can't go back. Now the underground city is occupied by Zagund. Anyway, I think he is doomed. I've heard of Quincy. Sunir had a lot of information about the Holy Crown City. After all, they used to be allies, his ability is limited, but he has a good sister. His sister is Dismark's mistress, so Quincy climbed very fast. Now he is trusted by Dismark. Are you sure you trapped Quincy? Yes. Hanji nodded. I've cleaned up all the traces they left behind. The underground city is full of forked roads that are as dense as a spider's web. It would be hard for others to find them. Even if they could jump over the canyon, it would be hard for them to find their way back. That's right. Sunir understood. Dismark dotes on Quincy's sister. If his sister begs Dismark, then Dismark has enough reason to deal with you. Sunir always mentioned Quincy's sister, which somehow reminded Hanjin of the woman in the underground city. Well, I killed a woman in the underground city. Why did you kill a woman? Are you? Morrison's showed a complicated expression. Go away. Hanjin was angry and amused. She almost killed me. I told you before that I was killed by a female bandit once. I was talking about her. What? A female thief? Sunir's face suddenly turned pale. What's wrong? It can't be that coincidental. It can't be that coincidental. Sunir muttered to herself, not paying attention to Hanjin's question. Sunir? What's wrong with you? Morrison's asked in shock. Raphael, tell us, what did the female thief look like? Sunir asked anxiously. She looked about 28 or 29 years old. She was very beautiful and charming. Hanjin recalled and said, her sneaking skill was very good. I didn't notice anything until her dagger was about to stab into my body. I was almost killed by her, but she seemed to be very stupid. When she used stealth for the second time, I also attacked. I thought she would easily dodge my attack, but I didn't expect her to stab me. It was a very strange feeling. I was prepared to run away. You must be talking about a thief who has never fought before. Leger laughed. Sigh. Sunir suddenly covered her forehead with her hand and groaned in pain. At this moment, Sunir finally understood why Dismark valued Hanjin so much. But what she didn't know was that countless vampires were gathering together at a place 20 miles away from the west of the city. The reason was very similar to what she had seen before. She also didn't know that fate had already been decided. Hanjin had no other choice but to establish his own force. Otherwise, he would die. Chapter 98. The road ahead had been sealed off, and the shops on both sides of the street were not doing well. A few soldiers were standing guard there, checking the pedestrians one by one. It would be strange if the shops were doing well with such strict checks. Hanjin and the others stood in the shadows of the street corner, looking at the road from afar. After passing through the checkpoints set up by the soldiers, they would reach the city gate a few hundred meters ahead. The west side of the city had 4 gates, but the north gate was the least guarded. The other gates were guarded by high-grade warriors, knights, and even magicians. Going through there would be suicide. Rush through. Morrison's asked. If it were just a few soldiers, Morrison's wouldn't even need to use his sword to kill them all. Wait a little longer. Hanjin shook his head and whispered, Don't you think it's strange? Why are the other gates so tight, but there's no one here? I feel like this is a trap. I also know that the situation here is very strange, but do we have any other choice? Sunir smiled bitterly. If we go through here, we still have a little hope. If we go anywhere else, we won't be able to get out. How about we go back and wait? Sasu interrupted. No, Hanjin said, I have a bad feeling about the west side of the city. We can't stay here any longer. We have to leave as soon as possible. Feeling? Leger was stunned. He felt that this reason was a bit ridiculous, but he thought that Hanjin was a savior, so under normal circumstances, he wouldn't oppose Hanjin's opinion, unless he felt that Hanjin was leading them to a dead end. Raphael is a prophet. We have to listen to him, Sunir said indifferently. Then what else is there to say? Morrison said, First, we can't go back. Second, we have to leave the city. Then we have to charge. We still have to wait. Hanjin shook his head. I think there should be people more anxious than us. You mean those dark elves? Sunir suddenly reacted. Didn't Michelle find out? 2 nights ago, those dark elves tried to break out of the city. For them to be in such a hurry, there must be a reason. Just as they were talking, a nearby bar opened. Everyone didn't care if it was the time to drink. After some discussion, they walked towards the bar. It was a bit conspicuous standing on the street. The barmaids were very surprised. It was rare to see people come here to drink in the middle of the day, and there were so many of them. However, there was no reason to push the business away. Several barmaids enthusiastically cleared out a few tables for Hanjin and the others to sit down. After ordering some ale, everyone took sips of it while patiently observing the situation outside through the window. Time passed bit by bit, and it was already afternoon. After a few rounds of ale, several familiar figures finally appeared on the opposite side of the street. Everyone couldn't help but look at Hanjin. They didn't expect his words to come true. Hanjin shrugged. You don't have to look at me like that. I was just guessing. Those dark elves also saw the people in the bar, but none of them moved. They just silently looked at each other across the street. After a long time, a person walked out from the shadows. He was still dressed in black, and his face was still as pale. However, compared to before, his entire body was filled with exhaustion. It was that dark elf, Hazel. Hazel smiled and walked across the street into the bar. He ignored the barmaids who came to greet him and directly sat at the table where Hanjin and the others were sitting. He looked at Sunir and asked, "Why are you here?" Sunir's eyes flashed with hatred, but she turned her head away. "We're not friends anymore, right?" Hazel's eyes were always on Sunir. "Were we friends?" Sunir sneered. Seeing Sunir's reaction, Hazel sighed. Just as he was about to say something, Hanjin's voice sounded. "At least, we're not enemies." Hanjin raised his glass and said with a smile. To be honest, Hanjin's impression of these dark elves was neither good nor bad. At least, he didn't have any ill feelings or hatred. This was because the dark elves didn't attack them with the vampires last time. Hazel looked at Hanjin and nodded with a smile. "That's right. No matter what, at least here, we're not enemies, and we shouldn't be enemies. Also, I saw your wanted poster." Leger reached out and flicked a glass full of ale over. The ale inside shook violently, but it didn't spill out. "Thanks." Hazel grabbed the glass and asked softly, "Have you been waiting here for a long time?" "Yes." Hanjin nodded. Hazel stared at Hanjin for a while and suddenly smiled. "You're waiting for us to take the lead, right?" "You're mistaken." A warm smile appeared on Hanjin's face. "As you know, we have some non-combat members here, so we have to be careful." "Is that so?" Hazel's smile deepened. "Then how long do you want to wait? If there's a chance, we'll charge in. If not, we'll go back." Hanjin said slowly. "This kind of thing can't be rushed." "I understand." Hazel nodded. "What if I can create an opportunity for you?" "What do you mean?" Hanjin was stunned. "It's very simple. We'll charge in front, but you'll have to take care of our backs." Hanjin couldn't help but look at Hazel in surprise. He tried to find a trace of a joke on his face, but all he saw was exhaustion. "Don't worry. No matter what, we won't attack you in this kind of situation." It was actually Sunir who spoke. Perhaps she was the only one here who understood Hazel. "Deal." Hazel smiled and extended his hand. Sunir turned her head to the side and ignored Hazel. Hanjin had no choice but to extend his hand and give Hazel a high five. Hazel didn't say anything else. He strode out of the bar and walked straight to the sentry post.